It was here in 1985 that Captain Gary Eastburn lived with his wife Catherine and their 3 daughters, about 10 minutes from the base where he served. Shortly before the events in question, Captain Gary received a promotion, which required him to undergo training at officer school. Consequently, he had to leave his family for a while, attending officer school in Montgomery, Alabama, for about 10 weeks. This was an important step, as the family was planning to move to England, where Gary could serve in the Royal Air Force. Gary had a strong marriage that lasted for 10 years, and they kept in touch while separated. However, on Saturday, May 11, 1985, Gary tried to call his wife several times, but to no avail. He took advantage of several breaks to call but never received an answer. Finally, he reached out to one of his friends who remained on Fort Bragg and asked him to check on his wife. The man did so, but when he knocked on the door, no one answered. He couldn't wait forever, so he simply left Catherine a note, asking her to call her husband back as soon as she could. While shining a flashlight and walking around the house, the friend accidentally woke up a neighbor named Bob Seafelt. When Gary called Bob, he mentioned that he had no idea what was going on with Catherine, but everything seemed strange. After a fitful night's sleep, Bob woke up the next day, with troubling thoughts swirling in his mind. He noticed that a stack of newspapers had piled up near the neighbor's door and realized he had last seen Catherine leave for the store on Thursday. Bob went to the neighbor's door and knocked, but no one answered. Listening closely, it seemed to Bob that he could hear a child crying inside. Knowing the family well, he assumed it was the youngest daughter, who was about 2 years old at the time. Concerned about the situation, Bob called the police at 12:53 p.m. and asked them to check on the family. When the patrolman arrived at the scene, they began the standard procedure and shone his flashlight through the windows. They saw the baby in a crib, appearing pale and emaciated. Despite the protocol the officer needed to follow, they instinctively felt that something alarming had occurred. A patrolman immediately cut through the window screen and entered the house. Upon entering, he saw the baby girl, who was alive but in dire condition. Later, authorities reported that a few more hours in that house could have been fatal for her. After handing the baby over to his partner, the patrolman returned inside the house, checking the rooms with his weapon drawn. In the main bedroom, he discovered the lifeless body of 3-year-old Erin Eastburn. A pillow covered the child's face, and it was apparent that her throat had been cut, with her head nearly severed from her body. She lay on the floor next to her parents' bed, where Catherine also lay. A pillow covered Catherine's face as well. When the officer removed it, he saw that her throat was cut, she was naked and had suffered multiple stab wounds, indicating she had been abused. The scene was horrifying, with blood everywhere. The patrolman ran outside, trying to catch his breath. When he was reminded that the family had 3 children, they still needed to find one more child who might be alive and in danger. He returned to the house, found Kara, but there were no signs of life. The 5-year-old had died in the same manner as her mother and sister. When the investigation began, detectives quickly noticed that a similar crime had occurred 15 years earlier involving a military family, the MacDonald family, who were killed in a similar fashion. This crime was committed by a military man, a husband and father named Jeffrey. Numerous coincidences were found in the handwriting of the criminals and the circumstances of these 2 murders, suggesting that they could have been committed by the same person. However, at the time of the massacre of the Eastburn family, Jeffrey MacDonald was already behind bars and could not have been involved in this crime. Rumors spread quickly, leading many to believe that Jeffrey MacDonald could have had an accomplice or an imitator. Forensic experts found blood all over the house, as well as clear traces of cleaning in some places, indicated by X stains of blood. It was obvious that the criminal had tried to clean up but left even more traces. Using luminol, investigators could see that the marks had been erased on the bathroom door handles. Likely, the perpetrator used a towel that had been thrown into the laundry basket. The crime was believed to have been committed between 8 p.m. on May 9 and 3 a.m. on May 10, 1985. As it turns out, the last person to see the family alive was the nanny, Julie. The young girl had been babysitting the youngest daughter for several days before their bodies were found and was automatically placed on the suspect list. Julie mentioned prank calls that Catherine had complained about before she was killed. Some man had been calling several times a day for 3 months, but it didn't particularly bother Catherine. She didn't feel any danger from these calls and never went to the police. Julie remembered another person with whom Catherine had been in contact, a certain Angela who was going to take the dog from the Eastburns, Dixie. Due to plans to move, they decided to give it away because there was no one to leave it with. According to the nanny, Catherine had left an ad in the newspaper, and after that, she received a call from Angela. Julie was curious about what happened next and unexpectedly shifted the focus back to the bloody crime of 15 years ago. She was worried that it could have been committed by a copycat of Jeffrey MacDonald and wanted to know what the police thought about it. The detective had no trouble getting the suspicious nanny to talk. She willingly shared her long friendship with Dr. MacDonald, believing that he was innocent. They had known each other for a long time and even exchanged letters for several years while he was in prison. When she was asked about her interest in the case, she was unable to justify his behavior, and the detective did not pay much attention to her words. When she confirmed her alibi, he simply removed her from the list of suspects. The police continued to work in the Eastburn house even after midnight, despite the late hour. A young man named Patrick Cohn approached them and decided to tell them about what he saw on the night of Friday, May 10, 1985, at about 3:30 a.m. He noticed a tall, fair-skinned man in jeans, a knitted hat, and a black jacket leaving Eastburn House. The man was carrying a garbage bag slung over his shoulder, got into his white Chevrolet Chevette, and drove away. Patrick's statement was taken seriously, and he was brought to the police station to help create a composite sketch. When the portrait was finished, there was a striking resemblance to a serviceman named Timothy Hennis. He was a 27-year-old man who, along with his younger brother and sister, had been adopted by the Hennis family, a couple who took all 3 of their children from an orphanage. They grew up in a fairly well-off family in Minnesota, which provided them with a bright future. Shortly before these tragic events, Tim married Angela in secret before Christmas in 1984. That same year, Tim's brother died in a motorcycle accident, so they opted for a modest celebration instead of a lavish ceremony. A couple of years later, they had a daughter, Christina. Tim admitted that he was familiar with the victim, Catherine, but there was a good reason for it. They decided to get dog for company, leading to the contact with the woman from the ad. Tim denied any involvement in the crime but mentioned a curious coincidence. He had arranged to meet Catherine on Tuesday, May 7th, just 3 days before the crime, to look at Dixie. When Tim first met the police, everyone was amazed because he looked exactly like the composite sketch. The police asked him to sign a waiver of Miranda rights, to which he agreed, provided he could be assured that he was not a suspect, which turned out to be a ruse. Timothy provided fingerprints, hair samples, saliva, and blood. He confirmed that he had indeed met Catherine that Tuesday and had taken her dog, after which they had not seen each other again. Timothy denied any involvement in the crime and provided a detailed account. Witness Patrick was called to identify him, and he pointed to Timothy. Despite Timothy's insistence that he had not been in the area early in the morning of May 10th, suspicions against him grew stronger due to his lack of an alibi. The police did not yet have an arrest warrant, so Timothy was released. However, after 7 hours, he was detained, officially charged with triple first-degree murder and abuse. Naturally, Timothy was not the only suspect. As is often the case, the police first considered the widower Gary Eastburn. When Gary was informed of the events, he remained surprisingly calm and simply asked if at least one family member had survived. When he learned that only the youngest daughter had survived, he broke down in tears. Gary had grown up as an ordinary young man. At the age of 12, his parents divorced, and his relationship with his stepfather did not work out. Despite this, he had a relatively calm childhood. He met Catherine in 1972, approximately 13 years before the tragedy. At that time, he was around 25 years old, having been born in 1947. Their daughter Kara was born in 1980. Gary decided to become a military man to support his growing family. When he finally returned to the city after the tragedy, he wanted to reach his surviving child. Instead, He was immediately taken to the police station for questioning, where they held him until about 2 a.m. Gary provided a reliable alibi. His blood and hair samples were taken before he was released. He was able to see his daughter late at night. She was in serious condition and did not even recognize him. Afterward, he went into their home to see what was missing. Gary had no idea who could have attacked his wife and children. They had no obvious enemies, but he remembered several prank calls that had started a few months before he left for training at officer school. The caller addressed Catherine by her first and last name, but no one paid attention to it at the time. Everyone thought it was just teenagers playing around, so no one raised the alarm. Now, in light of the tragic events, the calls seemed more suspicious. However, they could not be tracked due to a lack of technology at that time. After inspecting the house, the police reported that a metal safe containing important family documents was missing, along with $300 in cash that had been set aside for Christmas and Catherine's wallet with bank cards. This provided valuable clues. The ATM was identified, and it turned out that a transaction was made using Catherine's card. It was used shortly after the murders, including a transaction on May 11th. Detectives found a witness who provided a description of the man who came at night to withdraw cash, and this description exactly matched Timothy Hennis. In addition, she saw a white car belonging to Timothy. At this stage, the whole city already knew about the crime and the main suspect. Other witnesses also came forward. Timothy's neighbor saw him burning something in his backyard the day after the murder, likely getting rid of evidence. A local dry cleaner reported that Timothy had brought them a black jacket right after the crime. According to the description, it resembled the clothing that the witness Patrick had described. Timothy was questioned when his ex-wife said he had come to visit her that fateful night. His landlord mentioned that Timothy had not paid the rent for the house, which had accumulated over $300 in debt, but as soon as the eviction notice was served on May 10th, Timothy paid it off almost immediately. But where did he get the money so quickly? It seemed strange that the same amount disappeared from the home of the murdered family. Indirect evidence against Timothy was accumulating, but there was no irrefutable proof. By Christmas, it was decided to allow the suspect to post bail with the help of his relatives, and he managed to raise the funds. The reason for this leniency was the results of laboratory tests indicating that his biological materials did not match any evidence. Specifically, his blood type did not match. However, this could be attributed to the low accuracy of the testing methods used at that time. The prosecutor's office decided to turn to the only survivor of that bloody night, 2-year-old Jana. After the tragedy, the girl had not been able to come to her senses for a long time, but by February of the following year, she finally spoke. Gary was categorically against involving his daughter in the investigation, fearing that she would suffer further psychological trauma, but under pressure from the police, he ultimately agreed in order to seek justice for the victims. A special psychologist from North Carolina held 5 recorded conversations with Jana. During this time, she experienced several panic attacks and was still unable to recognize Timothy's photo. Based on the results of these sessions, it remained unclear whether there was one perpetrator or multiple criminals. Thus, the prosecutor's office decided to refuse to use Jana's testimony in the case. The trial was set for April 27, 1986. Timothy rejected the plea bargain offered by the prosecution. His lawyer wanted to change the location of the hearing but ultimately decided it would not make much difference. Instead, the defense focused on refuting the numerous circumstantial evidence on which the prosecution's case was based. The lawyer argued that the witness Patrick was lying when he claimed to have seen Timothy, described his appearance and car in such detail, especially since it had happened at night. He questioned how Patrick could have seen all of this in the dark. The lawyer discovered that the witness was going through a difficult time and had been pressured by the police. During numerous meetings with Timothy's lawyer, Patrick admitted that he might have made a mistake during the identification. The more he talked with the defense, the less certain he became about having seen Timothy on the street that night. On the day of the trial, the lawyer tried to get Patrick to admit that he had participated in the identification under pressure from detectives, but he did not. The defense discovered something even more significant. During the investigation, the police had gained access to the Fort Bragg duty log, which showed that Tim was on duty at the time of the crime, but this page mysteriously disappeared during the investigation. The lawyer believed that the detectives had intentionally torn out this page. Now, the defense attorney pressed this fact, interpreting the police's behavior as an attempt to convict an innocent person by destroying evidence of his innocence. Timothy's family was away at the time of the crime. The prosecution proposed a theory that Timothy had taken advantage of his wife's absence to start a romantic relationship with Catherine and visited her home on that fateful evening. However, Catherine rejected his advances, which angered him, leading him to kill her and her 2 children. The discussion then turned to the bank card. It was determined that the payment method had been used at 2:52 a.m. on May 11th when the defendant was on duty. Although this could not be confirmed, there was reasonable doubt that Timothy could have used it. Even though there was still no confirmed alibi for the night of the crime, the lawyers systematically managed to destroy the majority of the prosecution's arguments and raised doubts among the jury in order to convince them of Timothy's innocence. The prosecution presented frightening photographs from the crime scene and autopsies of the victims, about 100 photographs, which were included in a slideshow that lasted more than an hour. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Despite the defense attorney's desperate attempts to convince the jury of the defendant's innocence, on July 4, 1986, Timothy Hennis was found guilty on all counts. The defense attorney believed that the main reason for this verdict was their failure to insist on a change of venue. He felt that his job was not finished since Timothy was sentenced to death, so he focused on saving his client's life. Interestingly, just a few days after starting his sentence, Timothy received a postcard in prison signed by Mr. X. In it, a mysterious stranger claimed responsibility for killing Timothy's family and apologized for Timothy serving time for his crimes. Mr. X admitted that he had left North Carolina and had no intention of returning. Timothy informed his lawyer about the postcard. Later, it was used at the retrial, but at the time of its receipt, the prosecutor dismissed it as a forgery. During this period, Timothy's parents rallied around him. Despite their divorce, they made every effort to save enough money to pay for his defense. The Supreme Court of North Carolina was approached, and the lawyers cited bias, arguing that the jury had been provoked by the photographs. The defense insisted that nearly 100 gruesome images from the massacre were guaranteed to elicit a negative reaction from the jury. Despite the lack of irrefutable evidence against Timothy, it came to light that several detectives who led the case were nearing retirement. The lawyers believed they simply did not want to leave behind an unsolved crime of such magnitude and were seeking a scapegoat, which they considered Timothy Hennis to be. The defense successfully secured a change of venue to Wilmington, a coastal town located 100 kilometers from Fayetteville. The new prosecutor agreed to this change without hesitation, confident in the prosecution's tactics, but the defense was well prepared and closed all loopholes except for one. There was still no reliable confirmation of the defendant's whereabouts on the night of the murder. The defense aimed to discredit the prosecution's main witness, Patrick, in court. During the interval between the first and second trials, Patrick had committed several minor offenses, including driving without a license. When stopped by the authorities, he advised them to contact the district attorney since he was a witness in the Timothy case. The lawyers believed this statement practically indicated that he had received a bribe from the very beginning. More thorough examinations of the collected evidence refuted the case against Timothy. The shoe prints found inside the house were 3 sizes smaller than his. There was blood on a towel in the bathroom, as well as other traces that did not match his profile. The defense presented a black jacket to the judge that was tested for bloodstains. Even the hair found on Catherine's body did not belong to Timothy. In this context, the numerous circumstantial pieces of evidence that the prosecutor's office had used in the first trial appeared less convincing during the retrial. The prosecution attempted to challenge all the defense's arguments with their own versions, but none of this was compelling in light of the thorough preparation from the defense. 2 days later, the jury found Timothy not guilty on all counts. It is noteworthy that during this hearing, only a few photographs from the crime scene were shown, as opposed to the 100 images in a lengthy slideshow during the first trial. 3 years later, Timothy was released from death row. He re-enlisted in military service, served in Saudi Arabia and Somalia, and then returned to the United States. In 1998, Timothy and his family settled in Fort Lewis, Washington. In 2004, he retired from the Army and took a job at a waste processing plant. He also became a Boy Scout leader. Meanwhile, widower Gary followed his plan and moved with his surviving daughter to the UK. In 2009, he served in the Royal Air Force, after which he married a nurse. In 2009, after leaving the Air Force, Gary returned to the US and settled in Washington. Subsequently, legislation was amended to prohibit retrials for individuals already convicted twice of the same crime. Disagreements arose on the basis that during the first trial, Timothy was in military service, thereby placing him under a different jurisdiction. This left the state in limbo, although it did not exclude the possibility that he could be brought to retrial. Despite such situations being rare in the state's judicial practice, they did not return to the case for almost 20 years. It seemed that life was improving, but the case of the triple murder remained unsolved. Finally, in 2006, a detective investigating particularly brutal murders decided to test the DNA materials collected from the body of Catherine. However, the only information the laboratory could provide at that time was that the collected samples belonged to a light-skinned individual. By 2010, the laboratory in North Carolina became embroiled in a significant scandal. It turned out that over the past decade and a half, the state crime lab systematically concealed or manipulated evidence to ensure convictions. This was revealed in at least 230 cases, 10 of which resulted in the wrongful conviction of innocent people sentenced to death. 3 of them even received lethal injections and were deprived of life. The DNA in the Eastburn case was retested, and the examination showed that the materials from the crime scene in the archive matched those of Timothy Hennis. In light of such convincing evidence, his trial was reopened for the 3rd time. Timothy hired the best military lawyer named Frank Spinner to lead his defense team. The lawyer attempted to tarnish the reputation of the victim, Catherine, by alleging that she was promiscuous with Timothy, hinting that that was why his DNA might have turned up in her home. Timothy argued that she was unfaithful to him and that the real killer was an individual named Mr. X, who had written a postcard to him while he was in prison. This attempt had the opposite effect. The prosecutor's office pointed out the obvious lie, as Timothy had previously denied any intimate contact with Catherine. He later claimed that he initially did not disclose the affair due to fear of exposure. Despite a fierce struggle for Timothy's freedom, the chosen tactics now appeared unconvincing. On April 15, 2010, a jury recommended that Hennis be sentenced to death. In addition, he was demoted to Private E1, stripped of all pay and allowances, dishonorably discharged from the United States Army. Hennis was incarcerated at the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, where he remains to this day. All his subsequent appeals were rejected. Under U.S. legislation, without the president's approval, they cannot execute him. Therefore, the likelihood that he will be deprived of life is low. The U.S. military has not executed anyone from its ranks since 1961. Interestingly, in 1985, when the murders of the Eastburn family occurred, a 20-year-old woman from Rochester, Minnesota, where Tim had lived for a long time, contacted the police to share her story. Upon hearing about the triple murder in North Carolina, she revealed that at the age of 11, she had been abused by Timothy Hennis. Unfortunately, due to a data error, she was not permitted to testify. Had she been allowed to do so, the outcome of the second trial, when he was acquitted, could have been entirely different, and he would most likely have been found guilty again. Even now, this trial raises more questions than answers. The story of the nanny, who cared for the Eastburn children, also raises many questions. Julie was addicted, and there were witnesses who heard her confess to the crime. Additionally, her unhealthy obsession with Jeffrey MacDonald, with whom she even corresponded, raises further doubts. Some supporters of Timothy believe that it was Julie who could have imitated her idol and killed the family with whom she worked. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Leon Britz. The Sharetha and Leon Britz case of 2020 not only shocked South Africa, where it took place, but also attracted international attention. From the very beginning, the investigation identified an innocent person as the prime suspect. Only through a surprising confession was the real culprit revealed. The Leon family, European immigrants, moved to the small town of Patter in the northern Cape province of South Africa in the early 1970s. While Patter is modest in size, it plays a significant role as an economic and tourist center in the Bushmanland region. Leon has an older brother named Toki. Leon's family is relatively wealthy for their community. His father owns the only large hotel in the area, which later expanded into a large hotel and restaurant complex. Both Toki and Leon did well in school. After finishing school, Toki left his hometown, while Leon chose to stay. He helped his parents run the hotel as a teenager and studied business. Leon is intelligent and has a natural talent for business, which has helped him run the hotel effectively. At the Leon family hotel, many events, parties, and celebrations took place. During one of these occasions, Leon spotted a beautiful young girl among the guests. She was a brunette with green eyes and a charming smile. Curious, he approached her to introduce himself and discovered that she was only 14 years old and still in school, although she appeared much more mature. This revelation confused Leon, who was 25 at the time. Despite his concerns, he asked her to dance, and afterwards, they spent about an hour talking on the terrace. The girl's name was Saratha, and from that moment, Leon could not stop thinking about her and eagerly anticipated their next meeting. Saratha was born on September 6, 1990, the youngest of 3 children to immigrants from Eastern Europe. Her family faced severe financial hardship. When Saratha was only 9 years old, her father died of a snakebite, leaving her mother to raise 3 children on her own, while struggling to provide for them. As a result, all 3 sisters had to go to work to help support the family, leading to a difficult and arduous childhood. Leon, a rich guy, suddenly entered her life. Leon truly loved her. He found every opportunity to see her, picked her up from school, took her to trendy restaurants, gave her expensive gifts and trendy clothes, and tried his best to make her happy. Saratha experienced the luxuries and wealth. She realized that with him, she had the ability to build a family where she and her future children would never have to worry about money. Saratha's mother approved of the relationship, despite her daughter's young age. She considered Leon to be trustworthy, decent, and kind, and no one doubted his sincerity. However, Leon's parents were quite concerned about the relationship, as it could lead to serious legal problems if it went too far. Despite their concerns, Leon insisted that he was willing to wait until Saratha turned 18 when he planned to marry her. About a year into the relationship, 15-year-old Saratha discovered she was pregnant. She was unsure about sharing the news, knowing that it would upset both her mother and her boyfriend. To hide her changing body, she began wearing baggy clothes and became quiet and withdrawn. Eventually, she couldn't keep it a secret any longer and decided to tell Leon. When she revealed the news, Leon was stunned. He realized that the situation would not only damage his reputation, but also create serious legal problems. Leon was worried about being accused of seducing a young woman, so he couldn't let that happen. He took her to a private clinic, where they confirmed she was pregnant with twins. Leon found a doctor at the same clinic who would perform anonymous abortions. Saratha was heartbroken. Leon, who had promised to love and protect her, was now pressuring her to end the lives of their unborn children. Leon, who was older, convinced her that it was necessary. He promised that after marriage they would have children, but now having children would ruin their lives and their dreams of a happy future together. Left with no other choice, Saratha agreed to the procedure. She experienced physical pain for days afterward, but the emotional trauma was even worse, leaving her feeling guilty and deeply depressed. She isolated herself in her room, crying constantly. Her mother did not understand the severity of the situation, thinking that her daughter was simply upset after an argument with her boyfriend, believing that things would be better once they made up. A few days later, Leon visited Suretha at her home. He then took her into town to walk around the park and do some shopping. He thought this would help her feel better. Although she eventually returned to her normal routine, her feelings of resentment and suspicion towards him remained. 3 years later, during her senior year of high school, the Suretha discovered she was pregnant again. She was just a few months away from turning 18, and this unexpected pregnancy was not supposed to create any significant problems. However, when she informed Leon, he reacted very negatively and insisted that she terminate the pregnancy, claiming they were too young to start a family. This time, Suretha firmly refused, stating that she would keep the child, even if it meant raising it alone. After some consideration, Leon eventually proposed to her, presenting a diamond ring. By this time, the intense feelings they had for each other had faded, but Suretha's pregnancy left him with no choice. Shortly after her 18th birthday, the couple got married in a lavish ceremony. Although they appeared happy, they both had doubts about their decision. A few months later, they welcomed their first son, and 2 years later, they had twin boys. The family lived a wealthy life. Leon's parents built a successful business over many years. Leon also started his own fast food chain and restaurant, which was thriving. However, starting in the mid-2010s, the family faced significant challenges. In 2014, Leon's father suddenly passed away due to long-standing heart problems, which affected his mother's health. She began to show signs of rapid dementia, forcing her sons to take her to a specialist clinic for care. Toki returned to his hometown after many years to assist his younger brother in managing the family business, and together they took over the operation of a hotel. Leon decided to let Suretha join the family business, something she had always wanted to do. They agreed to register a mining equipment and tools store in her name. She worked hard at the store while also caring for their 3 young sons. However, as the twins grew older, the parents had to find a suitable school for all of their children. Finding quality education in South Africa was not easy. They eventually found a good school in the nearby town of Kakamas, about 75 miles from Leon's home. They then rented a spacious house in Kakamas for Suretha and her sons to live in, while Leon stayed in Poeter to manage the business. Although Suretha enjoyed running the store, she had to give up that role to focus on raising the children. The family only visited Leon on weekends and holidays, and he rarely came to Kakamas because of his busy schedule. At first, everything seemed fine between the couple, but over time, they grew more distant, and their feelings for each other faded. In 2018, Suretha began experiencing health issues, which she initially dismissed. However, medical tests revealed that she had cancer and cardiovascular problems. She quickly underwent surgery to remove the malignant tumor and began a treatment plan. Thankfully, the timely intervention saved her life, but she now required ongoing therapy at a clinic in Johannesburg, which was quite costly. Leon's family was able to pay for Suretha's medical expenses. To help manage the household while she was receiving treatment, Suretha hired a nanny and a maid. By this time, Leon and Suretha had grown apart and were living separate lives. Suretha began an affair in Johannesburg. It appears that Leon was also seeing other women, as evidenced by explicit photos and text messages found on his phone. The couple now only stay in touch because of their 3 children. Despite the family problems, business is doing well. The hotel, retail stores and restaurant chain are making a significant profit. Leon has invested some of this money in real estate in major cities, which provides a good income through rentals. Their family is not only the richest in Poeter, but also one of the richest in the Northern Cape province. As Leon's business grew more profitable, He faced increasing threats from jealous people who wanted to harm him, his parents, and his brother. To protect his assets, he installed safes and hidden compartments in his office and home, where he stored cash in various currencies, stocks, diamonds, jewelry, and gold bars. Although the threats initially worried him, Leon eventually began to ignore them as they became a regular occurrence. He believed they were just attempts to scare him. A tragic event occurred that led to Leon's death. On October 7, 2020, Saretha called him to check on their dogs. A neighbor reported that they had escaped. Leon assured her that he would call back after checking on the dogs, but he never did. Worried, Saretha tried calling him several times, but no one answered. She left their children with a nanny and drove to their home in Poder. When she arrived, the front door was unlocked, but the house was eerily quiet and no one answered her calls. She went to the backyard and discovered her husband's body floating face down in the pool. There were wounds on his back, indicating that he was dead. In a panic, Saretha called the police, then contacted Toki to inform him of the situation. When the police arrived, they quickly sealed off the house. They found that Leon had died violently. His body had multiple stab wounds and signs of a struggle. A safe in the house had been opened and its contents taken. Initially, the police theorized that a burglar had broken into the house. And Leon was home at the time, leading to a confrontation that left Leon dead. However, many other valuables that could be seen in the house were still intact, suggesting that the burglars had specifically targeted the contents of the safe. Following Leon's murder, much speculation about the cause of his death arose on social media. Many people knew about the threats Leon had received over the years and suspected that competitors or enemies may have acted on those threats. Police later identified Leon's brother Toki as the prime suspect. Toki had managed the family business with Leon for many years and had visited Leon shortly before the murder, making Toki the last person known to have seen Leon alive. Complicating matters, their mother is critically ill, with doctors estimating that she has only a few months to live. It is rumored that Toki is unhappy with the way the estate has been divided, especially with Leon receiving the lion's share, and that Toki may want to change the will. This theory explains why other items in the house were left intact and why the killer only targeted the contents of the safe. However, Toki adamantly denied any involvement, claiming that he would never harm his brother, especially since they had never had any conflicts over money. He sought the support of Saretha, who expressed her belief in his innocence and offered to help him find a good lawyer. For nearly 2 months, the investigation had stalled with no new evidence, leads, or witnesses. Then, 35-year-old Jacques Van Vuren walked into the police station and proposed a deal. He would plead guilty and reveal the identities of his accomplices in exchange for a lighter sentence. Jacques and Saretha had been friends in school, and he had feelings for her, but she did not love him and eventually started dating Leon. They had not seen each other for many years, but one day they ran into each other at a shopping mall and started talking. Jacques was having a hard time at the time. He had gone through a divorce, lost his job, was an alcoholic, and was in dire need of money. Saretha realized that Jacques still had feelings for her, so she opened up to him about her unhappy marriage. She told him that her husband was abusive and treated her badly, but she felt trapped because he threatened to take their sons away and leave her nothing. Jacques was prevented from seeing his children by his ex-wife after the divorce, so he felt a deep sympathy for Saretha and wanted to help her. They exchanged phone numbers, and a few days later, Saretha called him with a tearful story. She claimed that her husband had abused her and that she could not leave him. She suggested that the only solution was to get rid of him. Saretha was a master of psychological manipulation, and Jacques believed her. Saretha also promised to pay him 500,000 South African rand, which was a lot of money, especially when he was in dire need of money. Jacques agreed to help her, but did not want to do it himself, so he decided to hire someone else to do it. After a while, Léon's business began to decline. All his chain stores began to close and suffered huge losses. Léon wanted to sell the hotel, but Suretha did not agree. At the end of September, Suretha and Jacques decided to start their plan. Jacques asked for half of the money in advance. However, due to financial problems, Suretha could only withdraw 100,000 rand and gave Jacques her diamond ring. With this money, Jacques hired a friend named Enrich Williams, who had a drug problem and was willing to kill for money. Enrich was worried that he could not handle a strong adult alone, so he brought in his friend Amantel Bareki to help him with the plan, and Enrich would share the proceeds with Amantel. Suretha gave the criminals her home address and told them where the safe was. She allowed them to take valuables from the house to make it look like a robbery. The only condition was that the dogs were not harmed, so they were released first. The neighbors noticed that the family's dogs were out and called her. This indicated that Enrich and Amantel were in the house. She then called her husband Leon to lure him into a trap. When he entered the house, one of the criminals hit him on the head with a baseball bat, while another attacked him with a knife, leaving him no chance to defend himself. Leon was stabbed 8 times and beaten with the bat several times. They then dumped his body in the swimming pool. After opening the safe, Amantel and Enrich found no cash, only securities, diamonds, and gold bars. They gave all the stolen goods to Jacques, who then gave them all to Suretha. The criminals chose not to take anything else from the house because they were worried about leaving too much evidence. They were relying solely on the large payment that Suretha had promised. Jacques was not allowed to be present at the crime scene. Suretha was worried that he might be identified on surveillance footage, especially since Toki had seen him several times and knew him as Suretha's friend at school. Jacques was only tasked with transferring the advance payment and instructing his accomplices to carry out the plan. Jacques was so worried about everything that he drove past Léon's house several times to make sure the criminals were ready and Léon was home. Jacques' car was caught on surveillance footage. While the license plate was unclear, the police took note of the car and its identifying features, eventually identifying the owner. Additionally, there was no money in the safe, and all of the family's accounts were frozen during the investigation. Suretha could not pay the hired criminals because selling the stolen goods, such as diamonds, gold bars, or securities, would reveal her involvement. She asked them to be patient, but Enrich and Amantel refused and began threatening Jacques. In desperation, Jacques does not receive the money he expected and feels guilty. Amantel and Enrich threaten him repeatedly, and he realizes that he faces the possibility of going to prison or suffering the same fate as Léon. He confides in his sister, who speaks to their mother, and together they convince Jacques to turn himself in. They advise him to expose the others involved in the scheme so that he can receive a lighter sentence. Jacques' real motive, in his full confession to the police, was that he believed he had done a noble deed, because he saw Léon as a man who had treated his wife badly, abused her, and threatened to kidnap their children. Suretha reported to the police about the will and property disputes between Leon and Toki. She wanted to imply that Toki was the culprit. However, the police decided to investigate Suretha thoroughly to find out her true intentions. During the investigation, it was discovered that Suretha and Leon had long since fallen out of love and were living apart. Suretha had a lover in Johannesburg, and she wanted to leave Leon to be with him. However, when she asked for a divorce, Leon firmly refused and threatened to take everything from her, including their children. It's difficult to determine Leon's true motivations, but it's likely he still cared for Suretha and wanted to repair their marriage. Meanwhile, Suretha had a plan to inherit his money and business after his death, which would allow her and her lover to live well. She also wants to removal of Toki by setting him up to become a killer, after which she will become the sole owner of the hotel, store, and restaurant after her mother-in-law passes away. Her plan can work if there is money in the safe and if she pays the hired criminals. In the spring of 2021, the trial and sentencing of all involved took place. The court considered each participant's role in this high-profile case. Jacques Van Vuren, who collaborated with the prosecution, provided detailed testimony and named his accomplices. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, eligible for parole after 5 years. The hired criminals, Enrich Williams and Amantal Barecki, were convicted of premeditated murder with added cruelty and robbery. They received life sentences with no chance of parole. Suretha Britz, who planned to kill her husband, convinced the court that she was the victim throughout their relationship. She claimed that Leon forced her to have sex when she was 14. A year later, after she became pregnant, she alleged that Leon forced her to have an abortion late in her pregnancy. Although their love faded, Leon refused to divorce her and threatened to take custody of their children. Suretha was eventually sentenced to 25 years in prison. The court took into account her remorse, her sincere confession, and her role as a mother to 3 young children. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Teresa Parker. Teresa Parker was born on September 9, 1965, to Claire and William. The family initially lived in San Diego, California. They later moved to a home in Lafayette, Georgia, where they settled permanently. Teresa had 5 siblings. She was the middle child. Her friendly and kind nature made her popular with all her relatives. In 1984, Teresa graduated from high school. Soon after, she married her first love. After a while, the couple separated in the early 90s. Teresa completed her training and became a switchboard operator for the city police department, quickly becoming a favorite of the police officers. One of those who loved her was Sam Park, born in 1956 in Lafayette. He had an older sister named Caroline and a younger brother named Kenneth. Sam had a close relationship with his father. Overall, he was a kind and intelligent person. In his spare time, he enjoyed exploring the outskirts of the city, hunting and fishing in the many freshwater bodies nearby. When Sam turned 18, he joined the military and later became a police officer. In the early 1980s, his younger brother Kenneth admired him and chose a similar career, serving in the Marine Corps before joining the police department. Inspired by Sam, Kenneth decided to go to law school. For Sam, becoming a police officer was a lifelong dream. During his career, he once saved a child from a burning building. When Teresa, a beautiful 20-year-old new switchboard operator, joined the police department, she caught the attention of many of the officers, including Sam. They quickly became friends, and before long, Sam asked her out. Their relationship blossomed and they became a couple. However, some of Teresa's relatives noticed that Sam sometimes had difficulty controlling his jokes and could easily get angry. Both Teresa and Sam had experienced failed relationships in the past. Teresa had been married once, while Sam had been married twice. He saw his new relationship with Teresa as an opportunity to start over. The couple married on September 11, 1993. Teresa, 28, married Sam Parker, 37, who had just been promoted to city police sergeant. Although the early years of their marriage were happy, their relationship began to deteriorate over time. They argued frequently, and the conflicts were severe. There were concerns that Sam might have violent tendencies. They later filed for divorce in August 2006, after nearly 13 years together. However, by the winter of 2006, they had reconciled and decided to continue their relationship. In March 2007, Teresa decided to end their relationship and went on vacation to Mexico without her husband. After returning from vacation, Teresa started looking for a new place to live in another city, while Sam would stay in their old house. She took a few days off to move and settle into her new home. The next day she moved her belongings to a new apartment. Then she visited her sister, Christina, who now lived near her. In the evening, Teresa left Christina's house. She drove her SUV back home. At around 10:30 a.m., she visited her good friend Rhonda's house. Although she had planned to go to her old house to move her belongings, she decided to stay longer to make sure that Sam had gone out and did not see her. She wanted to avoid any arguments. Rhonda was surprised that the once loving couple were now avoiding each other. Teresa revealed that Sam had always been short-tempered and aggressive, especially when he was drinking. They then ended their conversation. Rhonda went to bed while Teresa went to her ex-husband's house. The next morning at 6 a.m., Rhonda called her. Someone answered the phone, but there was silence on the other end. After a moment of silence, the call was disconnected. Rhonda tried to contact Teresa several more times but only got her voicemail. Rhonda called all the numbers Teresa had used, including her work number, but none of them worked. Concerned, Rhonda then contacted the police station to request a welfare check on Teresa, who did not return her calls. In the workplace, everyone was worried about Teresa's absence because she had never missed a shift before. A police team was sent to check on her at her ex-husband Sam's house. About half an hour after the call, around 6:30 a.m., the police arrived at Sam's house but got no response when they knocked on the door. They then searched the area, looking through the windows. They hoped to find Teresa's car to make sure she was okay, but only Sam's pickup truck was in the garage. The police then went to Teresa's new apartment, but no one answered the door there either, so they left without any information. The police later found Teresa's SUV near her ex-husband's house. No one saw her, even Sam tried calling her many times to ask about her. Initially, her relatives weren't too worried, thinking that Teresa was busy arranging her new apartment and might not have heard her phone while cleaning. However, it was unusual for her not to answer any calls, as that was not her typical behavior. The day passed without any updates on Teresa. Christina had a hunch that Teresa was in danger. Teresa's family then officially reported her missing to the sheriff. From the beginning, the police treated the case as a top priority. They sent several officers to talk to Teresa's ex-husband, Sam, to gather information about the events leading up to her disappearance. The Georgia Federal Bureau of Investigation became involved in the case. They had known about Teresa's family's domestic violence for years. On May 4, 2002, police were called by Teresa's neighbors to report that Sam was drunk and extremely aggressive. He had been drinking all day and was violent toward Teresa. The patrol officer observed a bruise on Teresa's face, indicating that she had recently been beaten. Despite this, she chose not to file charges against her husband. The next incident occurred on April 27, 2003, while they were on vacation in Florida. They were dining at a restaurant when her husband became intoxicated and began threatening to kill Teresa in front of others. She then attempted to leave the parking lot in her car. At that point, Sam pulled out his service weapon and fired several shots into the car. Even after the police arrived, he continued to verbally abuse her and denied firing his weapon. When Teresa accused him of something, Sam threatened to commit and end his own life. As a result, Sam was taken to a mental health facility in Florida, where he was held for 72 hours for evaluation. Doctors were particularly concerned about his disturbing statements, such as his claim that he knew how to dispose of a body without leaving a trace. Additionally, Sam had extensive experience concealing evidence. He is very familiar with the local area, including the least frequented locations. Kayla, Sam's ex-wife, described him as an alcoholic. When he drank, he became aggressive and violent. She recounted an incident where he smashed a glass on the floor in a fit of rage. Then grabbed her by the hair and dragged her through the broken pieces. He then chained her to the bed and only released her in the morning when he left for work. He also strangled Kayla and threatened her with a gun. She eventually escaped the abusive relationship by moving to another city to get away from him. The police were eager to solve Teresa's case quickly, especially since it involved 2 police officers, which would affect the reputation of the police department. They began by investigating Teresa's new apartment and Sam's house. When police arrived at Teresa's apartment, they found a note on the door from the courier saying that Teresa's order could not be delivered. Inside the house, everything appeared normal, with several cardboard boxes filled with Teresa's belongings. The police then searched Sam's home 5 times, which frustrated him, especially when they confiscated his hunting weapons for examination. Ultimately, the searches yielded no clues to Teresa's disappearance. All of her belongings, including her money and phone, were left behind. There was no activity on her bank accounts, so the possibility of her running away was rejected. At the end of March 2007, the entire Lafayette community was in confusion. Teresa had disappeared and no one knew where she was. This left everyone worried and many avoiding going out after dark. Those close to her suspected that Sam had something to do with it. However, Sam also expressed concern about Teresa's disappearance. He explained that she wanted to avoid divorce proceedings, so she ran away. However, this explanation did not seem reasonable. Hundreds of residents volunteered to assist police in searching for Teresa. Police made numerous attempts to locate her. Divers searched all local waters, and areas such as underwater caves were explored with robotic cameras. Posters with Teresa's image were placed on billboards and flyers were distributed throughout the community. During the search, police found no sign of her. The situation was further complicated by the rugged terrain, which included dense forests, numerous small lakes, and mountains. The police questioned everyone who knew Teresa. Within a week, the police had interviewed over 100 people. During these interviews, it became clear that Sam had a volatile personality, was extremely jealous, and lost control when he drank. Meanwhile, Teresa was determined to save their marriage. She kept her husband's abuse a secret and did not share it with anyone, although her relatives suspected that there were serious problems in their family. In March 2007, everyone was relieved when Teresa decided to divorce her husband, and they supported her decision. However, Sam's family had a different view of him. They described him as cheerful and kind, and although he struggled with alcoholism. Sam's brother claimed that most of their conflicts were actually caused by Teresa's actions, rather than by Sam. Only Sam's younger sister spoke up, saying that he did have a quick temper and, unlike Teresa, he often escalated conflicts instead of stopping them. On March 25, police interviewed Sam. At the time, he was not considered a suspect. However, during the interview, he provided information that contradicted what police knew. Sam claimed that he saw Teresa's car in the parking lot when he went fishing that morning. This claim was dismissed by police, as they did not find her car at the house at the time. The car later appeared near the house, but no one witnessed how it got there. He also falsely claimed that he had not contacted Teresa, but police discovered several calls he had made to her that morning. While this may seem like a small lie, it aroused suspicion, leading the investigation to take a closer look at Sam. Sam presented a different version of events. He suggested that Teresa may have run off with her boyfriend, Elvis, whom she had allegedly met on a recent trip to Cancun, Mexico. To investigate this claim, police traveled to Mexico. They interviewed hundreds of people, including tour guides, hotel staff, and local residents. However, they found no clues or evidence to support the story, nor could they identify her boyfriend, Elvis, which led them to doubt his story. Despite growing concerns about the case, Sam continued to deny any involvement in the crime. On April 3, police arrested a man in connection with Teresa's disappearance. To the shock of many, it was not Sam who was arrested, but his colleague, Ben Chapin. Police kept the details of the arrest secret. Ben was eventually released and cleared of any wrongdoing. Meanwhile, Sam was fired from the police department after 25 years of service due to his abusive behavior toward his ex-wives. He was permanently banned from returning to the force after his suspension. An internal investigation into Sam discovered explosives in his personal locker. The investigation into Teresa's case took months. Police were initially puzzled when Teresa's car returned to a parking lot near Sam's home. They discovered blood stains and signs of thorough cleaning in the car. Additionally, the trunk mat was missing. DNA analysis showed a sample belonged to Teresa, while they also found Sam's DNA in the same location. The police decided to arrest Sam. On February 4, 2008, nearly a year after Teresa's disappearance, police arrived at Sam's home, opened the door, and were arrested without resistance. The next day, he faced multiple charges, including murdering Teresa, invasion of privacy via computer, violation of public servant's oath, and invasion of citizen privacy. He was held without bail. Despite these charges, Sam maintained his innocence. Teresa's family, meanwhile, continued to insist that Sam was responsible for her disappearance, insisting that she feared him and did not want to return home. Despite the murder charges against Teresa, police have yet to find her body. Under state judicial practice, the chances of the prosecution winning the case are slim. Traditionally, few murderers have been convicted in cases where the victim's body is missing. As a result, the prosecution relied heavily on witness testimony, including Sam's ex-wives and Teresa's relatives. On August 17, 2009, in Walker County Superior Court, the prosecution alleged that Sam Parker had a history of violence against all of his ex-wives and was involved in an attempted murder. Sam had once confessed to his doctor that, as a police officer, he knew how to effectively hide a body. The prosecution detailed an incident that occurred when Teresa came to Sam's house to collect some of her belongings. They then got into an argument. During the argument, he killed Teresa, put her body in the trunk of her car. He then disposed of her body and carefully washed the car to remove any evidence. He then called his friend Ben and confessed that he had shot Teresa and planned to hide her body somewhere where it would never be discovered. He asked Ben to keep this conversation a secret. Ben shared his story just before the trial after reaching a deal with the prosecutor to drop all charges against him. Ben was supposed to testify against Sam. The prosecution said that during the time Teresa was missing, Sam suffered scratches on his hands and face. The prosecutor's office believes that these scratches were caused by Teresa in self-defense. Sam's attorney argued that he did not touch Teresa or her car. Teresa may have injured herself and then cleaned up the evidence and threw away an old rug before disappearing. The defense argued that all of the prosecution's evidence was circumstantial. Sam accused Teresa of having an affair. He even investigated her while she was on vacation and discovered that she had booked a double room, even though she was traveling alone. She also used a false name when booking the room. Sam suspected that Teresa had secretly met with his colleague, a police officer who had searched their home 5 times, but his colleague denied the allegations. Ultimately, the choice of the double room could simply have been because it had a large bed for comfort, or perhaps there were no single rooms available at the hotel. Sam still denies any involvement in the crime, arguing that there is no strong evidence to prove his involvement in the case or confirm Teresa's death. The jury was deadlocked and unable to reach a verdict, leading to the decision to retry. On December 3, 2009, 2.5 years after Teresa's disappearance, Sam Parker was convicted of murder, and he was also charged with obstructing and violating the oath of office of a civil servant. Sam was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 5 years. Sam continued to maintain that he had nothing to do with Teresa's disappearance. After the trial, he requested a new trial, but his appeal was denied. 3.5 years after Teresa's mysterious disappearance, on September 20, 2010, 2 farmers found a human jawbone in a cornfield near the Chattooga River in Georgia after a flood. A search party later discovered a nearly complete skeleton, and dental records confirmed that it belonged to Teresa. Her death was finally officially recognized. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head from a hole in the skull, not a gunshot wound. The discovery site was 100 kilometers from her home and on the route that Sam had taken to fish. Was confirmed by geolocation data. This led the police to conclude that Sam was responsible for Teresa's murder. Despite this evidence, Sam Parker maintained his innocence. He is currently serving a life sentence in... Hey detectives, welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Jamie Haggard. David Haggard was born on February 23, 1974, in Woodinville, Washington, United States. He is the oldest son of Arthur Richard, an agricultural worker, and his biological mother is largely unknown. When he was 15, Arthur had 2 more children with another wife, daughters Stephanie and Jamie Haggard. Jamie, the youngest, was born on December 2, 1980, in King County, Washington. She was cherished and spoiled by her father, Arthur. He sought to fulfill her every wish from the moment she was born. Jamie and Stephanie grew up very close. They often dressed alike and did activities together, making them look like twin sisters, due to their small age difference. Jamie loved spending holidays by the water, whether at the sea or a nearby lake, and frequently asked Arthur to take them to Poplavino when the opportunity arose. David's life as the oldest child was far from peaceful and happy. Unlike his father's and younger sister's lives. He moved to California, where he had to adapt to a new family that he barely knew. Feeling lonely and lacking parental affection, he turned to illegal substances in his teenage years. This marked the beginning of his downward spiral. He started with minor offenses, but things escalated. One day, David took a car without the owner's permission and was arrested for theft. He was released afterward, but did not learn from this experience and continued to engage in criminal behavior. Soon after, he was arrested twice for possessing illegal substances. His last arrest in 2005 resulted in a 2-year prison sentence, but he was paroled after a year due to his youth. The state decided to grant him a chance to clear his record, on the condition that he remain offense-free for 5 years. If successful, he could have his 3 felony convictions in California erased, leaving him with a clean record. After all the incidents, he returned to Washington. Meanwhile, Jamie is entering her teenage years, and this has brought many changes for her. She became more independent and no longer looked up to her older sister, Stephanie. She has big ambitions and sets high goals for the future. After graduating from high school, she dreamed of becoming a doctor. Ultimately, she chose to become a physician assistant. During this time, she met a young man named Jake, who came from Woodinville. They quickly became close, and their friendship gradually developed into love. In 2008, at just 19 years old, Jamie gave birth to twin girls, whom she named Dylan and Madison Rose. However, Jake and Jamie's relationship faced many challenges, and they split up shortly after their daughters were born. Despite the breakup, they maintained a friendly relationship and communicated regularly for the sake of their daughters, sharing custody without any issues. Jamie also successfully completed his studies and got a steady job at a medical center. David still had trouble during this time. He started using illegal drugs again, and his behavior became erratic and aggressive. As a result, he was arrested for public disorder conduct. Fortunately for David, at his hearing, he reached a plea deal with the prosecutor. The court decided to defer his sentencing again and placed him on probation, requiring him to undergo regular alcohol testing. He attended an anger management workshop and pledged not to repeat his illegal behavior in the future. Since his sentence was suspended, but not vacated, this means his previous crimes will still be on his record. Meanwhile, Jamie began a new relationship. Although her family didn't know much about the man she was dating, she called him her fiancé. Unfortunately, the relationship didn't go as she had hoped, and the romantic phase ended, leaving Jamie feeling upset. Seeking support, she decided to move in with a friend, which meant her children, the twins, stayed with their father, Jake. However, Jamie still made an effort to spend as much time as possible with her children to make up for her absence. David continued to engage in illegal activities. In 2016, he got into a fight with a friend over a car. Fueled by anger, he broke into his friend's house, where he stole several items, including a toaster and a refrigerator. Given his criminal background, he wanted to avoid being caught, so he set the house on fire. Initially, investigators couldn't determine the cause of the fire, but they discovered a crowbar at the entrance, suggesting that someone had forcibly entered the home. A few months later, in March, Jamie found a new place to live. She rented a house in Canmar, a small town on the shore of North Lake, Washington, just a 15-minute drive from Woodin Villa. David, who was homeless but still in touch with his family, approached Jamie. She kindly invited David, her half-brother, to stay with her for a few days. However, whether out of manipulation or convenience, David ended up moving in permanently. At first, his stay with she seemed to cause no inconvenience. Sharing the rent with him made her feel like she had gotten through a difficult period in her life. As time went on, the differences between Jamie and her half-brother David became more noticeable. She started to dislike his personality and habits, but they did share one common issue: both were using illegal drugs. To support her addiction, Jamie began stealing pills from her job at a local hospital to sell. Meanwhile, David began a relationship with a girl named Carly Scher, who frequently visited and sometimes stayed for long periods, which annoyed Jamie. Additionally, David also befriends a young man named Jason. Then, he invited Jason to move in with them, which upset Jamie. She didn't like Jason, so she treated him badly. She felt uncomfortable in her own home, and her relationship with David became increasingly strained. They argued frequently, and many of the arguments stemmed from David bringing Jason to live with them. The noise from David's parties even led neighbors to call the police on occasion. Whenever Jamie tried to address the situation, David reacted with anger and threatened violence. Over time, Jamie fell into depression. Her father, Arthur, who she often spoke with on the phone, noticed something was off with her, although she never shared the details of her troubled relationship with David, but Arthur could see she having problems. However, even if she had confided in Arthur, it likely wouldn't have changed anything, as their family viewed David as a kind and caring person. Jamie visited her friends and shared her feelings of fear and sadness. She confided that she was afraid of her half-brother David, particularly because of his violent behavior, and she lived in constant worry that he might attack her at night. On July 5, 2016, David stole a forklift from a construction site and used it to take equipment from there. After committing the theft, he set the vehicle on fire to cover his tracks. He was not alone. His accomplice, Carly, was with him. Additionally, he had taken over Jamie's house without her consent. He wanted to make changes that she did not approve of, leading to more arguments between them. During one heated argument, David violently struck Jamie, hitting her in the face and stomach, and demanded that she leave. Jason, a friend of David's who was present, did nothing to intervene and simply watched. Jamie left and spent the night at a friend's house. Afterward, he told Jason that Jamie was a burden and suggested that he should kill her. The next day, she returns home, which makes he feel even more disgusted, as he assumes he is the owner of the house. On June 9, 2016, Jamie spent the day at her father Arthur's house. Then, returning home, she planned to pack her belongings and leave for good. However, when she got home, she found her brother, David, with Carly. As soon as Carly saw Carly left the house, leaving her and he at home together. He, still angry, confronted which led to a heated argument. The situation became tense and led to a fight, as a result of which he overpowered and killed her. To dispose of Jamie's body, David dismembered it. Afterward, he attempted to burn some of the body parts on a spit in the backyard, which caught Carly's attention. She noticed him with a lit fire, which was unusual since he typically didn't cook outside. When she asked him about it, he said that before Jamie left, Jamie lit a fire. A few days later, David stole a car, packed a suitcase, and drove 20 minutes north to Snohomish. He then abandoned the suitcase containing Jamie's dismembered remains by the side of the road. As days went by without any news of Jamie, his daughter, Arthur grew increasingly worried, especially when David drove to his house to ask if he had heard anything about Jamie. It was unusual for she to go missing like this, which made Arthur suspect that something was wrong. He decided to reach out to some of Jamie's friends, but none of them had seen her or had any information. On June 17, 2016, Arthur went to Jamie's house, but she was not there either. In his desperation, he called over a police officer and reported his youngest daughter, Jamie, as missing. Almost a week after the crime occurred, David sent a message to Stephanie from an unknown number, pretending to be Jamie. His intention was to prevent her family from worrying, but this plan did not work well. Meanwhile, the police were already investigating and looking into bank transactions. They were suspicious because there hadn't been any activity taking place on Jamie's bank account or credit card. Meanwhile, Arthur focused on seeking help through social media, hoping someone would provide information about his daughter's whereabouts. 1 month after Jamie went missing, early in the morning, investigators went to David's home to execute a search warrant. This area quickly had many police officers appearing. David and Jason were questioned, but investigators found nothing suspicious about their statements or actions. Many witnesses were interviewed, and they all confirmed that Jamie and David had a troubled relationship. Additionally, their house is often active at night, which causes more concern. For hours, investigators searched the backyard hoping to find clues, but they found nothing. For Arthur, it was a relief that no body was discovered in the yard. He and the other family members still held hope that Jamie was alive. Meanwhile, David pretended to be concerned and helped with the search. However, Jamie's case was not the only one the police were investigating. In September, the investigation into a burned forklift led authorities to identify David as the prime suspect. During questioning, agents uncovered digital photographs of stolen items, including a refrigerator and a stove, which matched the model numbers of appliances stolen from a trailer. Carly was interrogated by the police, and she revealed that David had confessed to her about the arson. Jason also confirmed to the agents that he saw David bringing the stolen appliances to his home. This information made David's situation much more complicated. He ultimately had no choice but to admit his guilt, leading to his arrest. David was then sentenced to 10 years and 2 months in prison for arson and second-degree burglary. A year after Jamie went missing, police received an anonymous tip suggesting they search around Jamie's house again. Investigators believed someone must have information about the case, so they quickly followed up on the tip. However, after digging for most of the day, they found nothing. Months passed, and nearly 2 years since Jamie went missing, when a public works crew in Snohomish County found a suitcase while picking up trash along the road. Inside the suitcase, wrapped in a red blanket, is the remains of a person. The workers immediately reported their discovery to the authorities. Detectives quickly determined that the person in the suitcase had been murdered. However, due to the advanced decomposition, it was challenging to identify the victim or confirm gender. The forensic team sent samples for lab testing, and after 2 months, it was confirmed that the remains belonged to Jamie Haggard. Evidence pointed to David as the main suspect. GPS data from a stolen car showed that he had driven near the location where Jamie's remains were found. Additionally, police discovered that the blanket used to wrap the remains belonged to Jason and had been stolen by David in an attempt to frame Jason. As a result, David was charged with murder. On Monday, October 28, 2019, David Haggard was charged with second-degree murder. The following day, a jury found him guilty, and his bail was set at $2 million. On Friday, December 5, 2019, David appeared in a King County courtroom for his sentencing hearing. Prosecutors asked for the maximum sentence of 22 years in prison. Meanwhile, the defense argued that the sentence should be lighter, stressing that David should not be punished so harshly. Throughout the trial, David maintained his innocence and claimed he was not the one who committed the crime. He criticized the justice system for punishing innocent people and expressed his love for his younger sister Jamie. He insisting he could never harm her. When Stephanie spoke emotionally about her sister Jamie in court, David broke down in tears. The senior assistant prosecutor said that David had put Jamie's family, which was also his family, through pain for nearly 2 years by keeping the truth about her death from them. Ultimately, David was sentenced to 15 years in prison, followed by 3 years of community supervision, during which he would receive evaluation and treatment for his addictions. During this time, Jamie's children, Dylan and Madison Rose, mistakenly believe that their mother's absence is due to their father Jake, not allowing them to contact her. Fortunately, Jake remarried, and his new wife adopted the girls, Dylan Va Madison, raising them as her own. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Larry Holman. A small town, Festus, Missouri, USA, with a population of about 10,000, is a religious community. Almost all the local residents are people of faith, very calm and friendly people. It is a quiet place where everyone knows each other very well and keeps in touch. However, sometimes it is in such quiet towns that serious crimes occur. On November 21, 2000, the local police department received a call from a witness. She reported hearing gunshots near a factory and saw a suspicious vehicle, but she was too afraid to approach it. She believed that the man in the vehicle was injured. The police quickly went to the reported location. A few hundred meters away, they spotted a pickup truck in a field. From a distance, it looked like the truck had a problem because the hazard lights were flashing. As the officers got closer, they noticed the windshield was broken and a man slumped over the wheel. He showed no signs of life, and his foot was still on the brake pedal. On the floor, there was an unfinished soda can, which likely fell out of the man's hand after he was murdered. There was a large hole in his skull from a bullet that had penetrated and even broken the windshield. It appeared that the murder had occurred just minutes earlier, as the blood was still fresh and running down the floor of the truck. The officers quickly checked and found the victim's face was severely disfigured. Police officer Randy, who arrived at the scene of the crime. Randy said he had worked with the victim before, and the victim was Larry Holman. He also knew Larry's wife Tammy and their 2 children. When Randy called, he did not tell Tammy that her husband was dead, so she initially thought Larry was just injured and had come to the scene. When she realized he was dead, she collapsed with grief and began to cry. Larry and Tammy met at church. Although she was much younger, Larry fell deeply in love with her and pursued her. At the time, Tammy was 16 years old, and Larry was 28. He was divorced and had a daughter from a previous marriage. After Tammy graduated from college, their romantic relationship began. Friends and family described their relationship as genuine and loving. Larry's co-workers noted that he even kept a picture of his wife in his lunchbox so he could see her whenever he took a break from work. They married and had 2 children, Josh and Natalie. And their family was very religious. Larry was known to be a kind person. He had no criminal record or connections to the criminal world, making it unclear who might want to harm him. An analysis of the car was conducted, and the bullet's trajectory was reconstructed. It was determined that the shot was fired from a significant distance using a powerful cartridge. The bullet entered through the rear side window, traveled diagonally through the headrest, and struck Larry in the back of the head. After sustaining the head injury, Larry's leg remained on the brake pedal, causing the car to stop. Severe injuries cause immediate death. It was assumed that an unfortunate hunter had done it by accident. However, further investigation revealed that the shot did not come from the woods, raising questions about the vehicle's movement. Although the braking distance was determined, it was unclear whether Larry stopped before or after he was injured. Additionally, the first officers on the scene noted that the car's headlights were off, suggesting that the vehicle could not have been moving when the injury occurred. They later confirmed that Larry may have parked near the factory, and the murder was intentional. Officer Randy believed that Larry was the target of a planned attack, but the other officers were not supportive of the idea because the area was safe and had never had a similar incident before. In fact, there had been no murders in decades, making it hard to believe that anyone would harm a good man like Larry. The investigation began by interviewing everyone who knew the Larrys, starting with neighbors and relatives. The neighbor who lived across the street from Larry said he had seen Larry at church just before the murders, and that they had both attended church services. The neighbor had heard that Larry was going through a hard time and had quit his job. The neighbor noticed that Larry seemed nervous, but Larry brushed off any concerns with jokes. The neighbor reported an incident when he and Larry were hunting in the woods. At some point, Larry and the neighbor became separated in the woods. Moments later, Larry called his neighbor and reported that he was injured and gave his coordinates. The neighbor quickly ran to help him. As he walked through the woods, he noticed a stranger wearing camouflage walking in the opposite direction. In Missouri, hunters are required to wear camouflage when hunting with a firearm, so this did not seem unusual. When the neighbor found Larry, he discovered that Larry was okay, as the bullet only grazed his head by a few inches. The neighbor concluded that the hunter was inexperienced and did not know how to use a gun properly. Larry later said he did not see the shooter, suggesting that the shooting may have been accidental. There were many people out hunting at the time. It is not uncommon for a hunter to mistakenly identify another person as prey, resulting in injury or even death each year. However, Randy believes the shooting was not an accident. Unfortunately, Larry's neighbor was unable to provide a detailed description of the hunter he encountered. Police then interviewed the woman, named Helen, who called the police to report the incident. Police spoke to her to see if she had noticed anything unusual on the day of the murder. According to Helene, just before she called the police, a car had pulled up near her house. A man got out, dressed in camouflage, pulled out a large shotgun, and walked along the railroad tracks toward the woods. He did not cross the tracks, however, which was odd, since hunters usually walk straight into the woods. Helen said that she had no idea what had happened afterward. Police investigated Larry's background in the hope of finding clues to the killer. However, they discovered that he was a calm man with no criminal record and a devoted husband. He had worked at the factory for many years, but had recently decided to quit and was looking for work. Everyone who knew Larry described him as a good person who would never be involved in any crime. The community was small and tight-knit, which added to their concerns. The motive behind the crime is unclear, leaving locals fearing that a madman may have committed the crime and is on the loose. public pressure mounted on the police to quickly apprehend the suspect. Meanwhile, rumors began to spread throughout the city. Many of the rumors cast a negative light on Larry's wife, Tammy. They said she was too young for Larry. They pointed out that she wore revealing clothes behind her husband's back and frequently visited nightclubs and bars while he was at work. Strange cars were also seen near her home at night. However, there were reports that Tammy spent time with her children and seemed to be a good wife. But rumors began to spread that she was cheating on her husband and that her lovers were visiting her frequently. Therefore, all the young people who visited Tammy while Larry was away became suspects. If she was indeed unfaithful, any of her lovers could have had a motive for the attack. A neighbor gave the police important information. She said that her children were playing with Tammy's children. A few days after Larry's death, when she went to pick up the children, she noticed a strange man in the house. He acted as if he were the host. The neighbor found the man's behavior very unusual, especially since Larry had just passed away. When the neighbor questioned, Tammy explained that the man was just an old-school friend who wanted to support her during this difficult time. This attracted the attention of the police, and they decided to identify him. The police discovered that the man was Tim Smith. The police discovered that Tim had moved in with Tammy the day after Larry died. He quickly took over Larry's space and used his belongings without hesitation. It was clear that Larry's children were unhappy with the situation and did not like having strangers in their home. The police decided to look into Tim's criminal history, suspecting that he might have had a motive for committing the crime. Surprisingly, the police did not find any serious issues on his record. The most serious offenses on his record were a few traffic violations. Tim and Tammy were high school classmates and dated for a while, but they broke up after graduation. However, it seemed unusual that Tim would quickly go from former classmates to roommates living in Tammy's house. Tim was then brought to the police station for questioning. At the police station, Tim denied any involvement in Larry's death, but claimed that he had moved in with Tammy shortly after her husband's death. He claimed that before that, he had only visited occasionally and slept over a few times. At the beginning of the questioning, he claimed to be Tammy's boyfriend. Furthermore, he admitted that he had been her lover for a long time. Tammy had never been faithful to Larry and had had several affairs. She had planned to leave her husband to marry Tim. Witnesses reported that Tammy acted strangely after Larry died. At the funeral, she wore a revealing outfit and seemed nonchalant throughout the funeral. She seemed cheerful and spent a lot of time on the phone. One of Larry's sisters heard that during these calls, Tammy was talking to other men. Rumors began to spread that Tammy was not only having affairs with Tim Smith, but with many others. A witness reported that Tammy was sunbathing in a revealing bikini in front of her house. He stopped to say hello and compliment her, leading to a relationship. But he was much younger than Tammy, and their relationship quickly ended. However, police investigated and found a third man, Charlie Miller, who was often mentioned. According to Larry's eldest son from his first marriage, Charlie worked at a nearby grocery store. After dropping her daughter and son off at school, Tammy would go to the park to meet Charlie, where they spent many hours together. Several of Charlie's friends confirmed that Charlie had a romantic relationship with Tammy. They first met when Charlie worked as a contractor for Larry. Charlie was married at the time and had a close friendship with Larry. While working on renovations at Larry's house, Charlie met Tammy, who was very flirtatious. Their teasing soon turned into a more intimate relationship while Larry was away. Tammy eventually told her husband about the affair. However, he chose not to divorce her and instead tried to save their marriage. He asked Charlie to end his relationship with Tammy. The number of suspects continued to grow. Even if Tammy did not directly kill her husband, she could still be considered the mastermind of the crime. She had been having affairs with multiple people, and each had a motive for the murder. police discovered text messages on Tammy's phone that showed she was having affairs with Tim Smith and Charlie Miller at the same time. To investigate further, police questioned Tammy. She revealed that shortly before Larry died, Tom Rumble had started stalking her. She provided evidence through messages he sent her on a messaging app. She described him as a dangerous man. Just before Larry died, Tom began writing letters to Tammy. He expressed his love for her, his desire to have children, and his willingness to marry her. However, Tammy felt uncomfortable and tried to distance herself from him because of his obsessive behavior. She suspected that he might be involved in her husband's murder. Tammy provided the police with evidence of their correspondence. Even though her husband had died and she was in a relationship with Tim Smith, Tom's harassment continued. Tammy felt trapped and didn't know how to get Tom to stop. By the time the police were notified, Tom was still sending Tammy letters that she wasn't responding to. In fact, she had sought a restraining order against him in court. When the police spoke to Tom, he claimed to have genuine feelings for Tammy, but dismissed her request for a restraining order as an overreaction. He didn't consider himself a threat. He said that he had only come to give her a bouquet of flowers that day and did not want to scare Tammy. However, his behavior was quite suspicious, and he accidentally revealed that he had been to Larry's house many times, as he knew the layout of the house very well. This suggested that he had visited Tammy while her husband was away. After the autopsy, the medical examiner confirmed that Larry had been killed with a large caliber gun, specifically a .243 caliber rifle, which is the standard deer hunting rifle, and a correspondingly weighted bullet was used. As police continued their investigation, they discovered that shortly before the murder, Charlie, who was working as a contractor at the time, had talked to Larry about hunting. During a subsequent visit, Charlie showed Larry his .243 caliber rifle. Police specifically noted that Larry was killed with a .243 caliber rifle, which was associated with Charlie Miller. Additionally, an anonymous informant told police that Tammy's boyfriend owned a .243 caliber rifle. Charlie's gun was taken for testing. Fortunately, the police found a bullet near Larry's car that matched the gun. In Larry's death, a love triangle was involved. The police learned that Charlie and Larry had been close friends for a long time. Police suspected Charlie of the murder because he owned a car that matched the description of a woman who lived near the railroad tracks. Although she did not speak directly to the driver, she saw him clearly. When shown a photo, she was able to identify Charlie. After examining Charlie's weapon, the police confirmed that Larry had been killed with Charlie's rifle. On January 9, 2001, the police went to Charlie's house to arrest him and inform him of his rights. Charlie later confessed to killing Larry. He was arrested and taken to the police station. Tim Smith and Tom Rumble were cleared of any involvement in the murder. After his arrest, he testified that he drove to the house where Tammy lived near the railroad tracks, got his rifle and wore camouflage that day. He then walked along the tracks, retracing the route he had taken through the woods and fields that morning. The only question that remains is how did he know where Larry would be at that time? Charlie confessed that Tammy had been urging him to take action. She expressed her suffering due to her husband's cruelty, and Charlie felt compelled to rescue her from this oppressive situation. This was not the first time Charlie had targeted Larry. During a hunting trip in the forest, he had previously fired a shot that narrowly missed Larry's head. It was evident that this was intentional, as Tammy had informed Charlie about her husband's whereabouts, making it easy for him to find Larry in the woods. After this initial attempt, Tammy spoke with Charlie, who tried to convince her to leave Larry and be with him instead. Despite this conversation, she continued to provoke Charlie, believing that a second attempt on Larry's life would succeed, especially with Larry's upcoming marriage putting pressure on Charlie, who was also a close friend of Larry. Why didn't Tammy divorce her husband if she wasn't happy in her marriage? The answer is simple. She and Charlie didn't want a divorce because they wanted to avoid dividing assets and child custody. Additionally, they were motivated by the prospect of benefiting from Larry's life insurance policy. Just before these events, Larry had purchased $1 million insurance policy. Tammy saw this as a great opportunity, but then she found out that it wasn't a life insurance policy, but an employer protection policy. Therefore, Tammy could only claim $150,000. Now that Tammy is under interrogation, she firmly maintains that she did not kill her husband and had nothing to do with his death. She begins to blame Charlie for everything, believing that her lover had developed strong feelings for her due to their brief relationship. She believes that Charlie sees Larry as the only obstacle to their happiness, so he decides to get rid of Larry. Charlie had a clear motive for the murder. During his trial, Charlie Miller, 49, pleaded guilty again to the murder. He argued that he was in emotional distress and was on medication at the time of the crime, which affected his understanding of his actions. As part of a plea agreement, Charlie was sentenced to 25 years in prison and is scheduled to be released in 2028. Throughout the trial, Tammy denied any involvement in the crimes. Her attorney continued to support her testimony. The prosecutor's office presented evidence, including numerous phone calls and text messages involving Charlie. Based on this evidence, it was shown that Tammy was a deceitful and cunning criminal who manipulated multiple men at once. The prosecution presented indirect evidence of her involvement through various telephone conversations that took place on the day of the murder. She was in frequent contact with Charlie, who also implicating her while discussing the execution of the order. However, the prosecutor's chances of winning at trial were uncertain. As a result, the prosecution proposed a deal to Tammy. 30-year-old Tammy Holman was sentenced to 7 years in prison, but she maintained her innocence, claiming that her confession was coerced. In 2009, she was released and returned to Festus. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Orsolya Gal. Orsolya Gal had lived in Forest Hills for over 10 years. She is originally from Hungary and met her future husband, Howard, at a Christmas party in Budapest in 1994. At that time, she was 20 years old and had just graduated from business school, while Howard was about to complete his master's degree. They exchanged love letters for several weeks, then taking a vacation together in Thailand. After returning to New York to continue his studies, he invited she to visit him, and they have been together ever since. He founded a consulting firm and was very successful. Meanwhile, she worked in Manhattan for many years, eventually putting her career on hold to have and raise her 2 sons, Jamie and Leo. On August 2, 2012, the family moved into a 5-bedroom home. They lived happily together, and friends described Orsolya as outgoing and friendly. People say she is always smiling, loves to joke, and is willing to chat about any topic. She loved to travel, and her Facebook profile showcased photos from family trips to Paris, China, and Tokyo. However, her greatest happiness is her sons, whom she cared for deeply and was very attentive. On the morning of April 16, 2022, Glenn Van Nostrade was walking his dog around 8:00 a.m. At this time, he saw a large cloth bag lying among a pile of trash near the sidewalk, on the grass near the corner of Venu Subway and Jackie Robinson Avenue. While he often encountered litter on that busy road, something about this bag felt off. As he approached, his dog became agitated and tense. Only when he stood near the bag he noticed the reason. Blood was seeping out and running down the concrete sidewalk. Initially, Glenn suspected the bag contained an animal carcass. He nudged it with his foot and found it surprisingly heavy. Curious, he bent down to unzip the bag. Then he saw a pair of pale bare legs inside. He tried to make sense of what he was seeing. At first he thought they were the legs of a mannequin, because the skin looked stiff and unnatural. However, when he unzipped the bag further, he realized that the legs were covered by black jeans, a belt, and part of a woman's waist. Glenn found the woman curled up in a fetal position, her head bowed. He called 911 at 8:02 a.m., deeply disturbed by his discovery. He believed the victim might have been a teenage girl, based on her physique. Immediately after that, the police arrived. They quickly blocked the area around the crime scene. At this time, Glenn decided to use his dog to search the nearby area. While crossing the subway avenue, he noticed a trail of blood and alerted the police. This bloody trail, which extended for half a mile from the location of the bag, ultimately led the investigators to a $2 million house on Juno Street. A team of police stormed that house. During a quick search, they discovered blood on the first floor and in the basement, as well as a bloody knife on the third floor. In a bedroom, they found Leo Klein lying in bed. He said he lived in the house with his parents, Orsolia and Howard. He also said that his brother Jamie was away. After questioning, the police determined that Leo knew nothing about the situation, so they released him into the care of a relative. Meanwhile, the police identified the body found in a bag. It was Orsolia, Leo's mother, who was 51 years old. A forensic examination revealed that she had her throat cut and suffered 58 stab wounds to her torso, neck, and arms. There were also injuries on her palms and fingers, indicating a struggle. Forensic expert Miles said that the crime was very brutal, and the fact that the body was carelessly disposed of showed that this was an act driven by emotion. The extreme violence of the attack indicated that the murderer was likely someone known to Orsolia, rather than a stranger. This led investigators to suspect that the perpetrator could be the husband, a child, or even a lover. The youngest son, Leo, has been eliminated as a suspect. Jamie, the eldest son, and Howard, the husband, were both out of town on the day of Orsolia's death, but they were still being questioned. The identity of the mystery man who dumped the bag remains unknown. The investigation has caused anxiety in Forest Hills following Orsolia's sad death. Neighbors were deeply moved by the tragedy. Those familiar with Orsolia and her family brought flowers and offered their condolences. The shocking death has raised more questions than answers, leaving the motive for the crime a mystery, as police continue to hunt for the suspect. When the police informed the media that Howard and Jamie were important people, the public's attention quickly turned to Jamie. On the morning of Friday, April 15, Orsolia was reportedly looking at potential colleges for Jamie. Howard tweeted that he arrived in Portland at 1:36 a.m. on April 16. He later posted another status, which has since been deleted, announcing that he would be returning home to New York soon. The change appears to have come after Howard received a heartbreaking text message from Orsolia earlier that morning. The message said, "He's back. Don't call the police, or he'll kill the Howard family." Shortly thereafter, Howard was contacted by police and informed that the body of his wife, Orsolia, had been found. He worried about his family's safety and faced scrutiny from reporters and social analysts. They said that his Twitter posts seemed like a way to create an alibi. The message from Orsolia's phone seems like a fictional threat from a movie, making one wonder why a killer would waste time sending such a message after committing the crime. Additionally, there were no signs of forced entry into the house. It appears that Orsolia knew the killer, or that he used a spare key to enter the house. Police are examining phone calls, surveillance camera videos, and receipts from places Orsolia visited to reconstruct her journey before her death. On Friday, April 16, 2022, she planned to go to Manhattan that evening to see an opera at Lincoln Center with friends. However, when checking her phone, the truth was completely different. On the night of her murder, she had been in contact with 3 different men. One of them will accompany her to Lincoln Center. All 3 men are currently under investigation. That night, Orsolia returned home alone by train and stopped by a bar at Forest Hills train station. This is where she often comes to have a drink or a snack after going out. She spoke with the manager, whom she knew well. Police believe Orsolya entered her home at 2:40 a.m., around the same time her attacker gained entry. At 4:30 a.m., he carried her body out using her son's hockey bag. A note found on the refrigerator read, "Find a new handyman." On the night of the murder, Orsolya had spoken with 3 men, one of whom was David Bonola, a 40-years-old handyman who had been working in their home for the past 2 years. He specialized in heating and ventilation. He is married with 2 children. However, 21 years ago he illegally immigrated to the United States from Mexico. By the time of Orsolya's death, he had become estranged from his family and was living in an apartment in nearby Richmond Hill. Neighbors described he as a night owl who often played guitar or rode his bike after dark, frequently stopping at a local cafe for food. The police discovered that David had a close relationship with Orsolya, as they often communicated over the phone. He frequently left comments and heart emojis on her Facebook photos, often calling her the most beautiful woman. According to the owner of a store across the street from his apartment, he would come in every evening to buy a red rose and even showed the owner a photo of Orsolya, expressing his love for her. The police were aware that she had been in contact with he in early April 2022, just weeks before her murder. The authorities then decided to secretly follow him to look for new clues. 21-years-old Olivia Kolinsky had been a barista at a cafe for 3 years, where David was a frequent visitor. Olivia described him as strange and somewhat creepy, noting that he often stalked people. He frequented the cafe multiple times a week, watching the waitresses and baristas closely, making comments about their looks. He also left affectionate notes in the tip jar. He even proposed to 2 of the employees. The cafe staff called the police several times, but he always managed to leave before they arrived. David's passion for YouTube clearly shows his thoughts and desires, mainly revolving around 2 themes, seduction and violence. He has created a YouTube playlist with many videos related to local crime. The playlist also includes many videos about intimacy and women, offering tips on attraction and seduction. One playlist has over 200 videos, all aimed at helping viewers develop their ability to attract women. It is worth noting that he is a man with a rich imagination and a penchant for violence. Then, surveillance cameras captured images of David walking near his apartment with a homemade white bandage on his left arm. That day, he visited a city doctor for treatment of cuts on his hands. However, he was referred to the hospital because the cuts were too deep. The police postponed cleaning up the trash at the crime scene for several days to conduct a special search, because they believe this pile of trash may contain evidence that help convict him. Among the discarded objects in the trash pile, they found blood-soaked brown boots, believed to belong to David, which were worn when he stabbed Orsolya nearly 60 times, along with a bloody t-shirt and bloody bandages. On Wednesday, April 19, 2024, detectives returned to the area to locate David, who had noticed he was being followed. David approached a patrol car and said he heard they were looking for him. The police then took him to the station, and there he admitted his involvement in Orsolya's murder. After a brief pause to eat a croissant, he repeated his confession for the video recording. During the prosecution, David explained that he and Orsolya had an on-again, off-again relationship for 2 years. Recently, she had ended their relationship again. On the morning of April 16, he went to her house to try to reconcile. However, their argument became so violent and loud that they had to go down to the basement to avoid waking her son, Leo. The argument became more heated, making David very angry. In a fit of anger, he grabbed a knife and cut her throat, stabbing her multiple times. To prevent Leo from discovering the body, he placed it in the boy's hockey bag and discarded it in a nearby forest park. David admitted that he sent a threatening message to her husband, Howard, in which he stated he would kill the rest of the family. However, his testimony contained several inconsistencies, particularly regarding his possession of a knife from Orsolya's kitchen during the fight in the basement. The next day, he changed his confession. He explained that he had gone to her house after learning that she had given him HIV and a sexually transmitted disease she had contracted from other men. He claimed that he knew she had received a call from another man and was planning to meet that man, which he could not accept. He also reported that during the altercation, she took a knife and forced him to leave the house, threatening to kill him. At that moment, he seized the knife from her and harmed her. On April 20, David Bonola was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, first-degree criminal trespass, and fourth-degree criminal possession of a weapon. Despite confessing to the crime twice, he pleaded not guilty. If found guilty, he could face a sentence ranging from 25 years to life in prison. District Attorney Melinda Catt announced that a serious crime had occurred, leaving two teenagers, Leo and Jamie, without their mother. This incident has also created fear in the community. David Bonola was sentenced to 25 years in prison in November 2022 after pleading guilty to manslaughter in the killing of Orsolya Gal in Queens, New York. After his prison term, he will be required to serve 5 years of probation. Many believe Orsolya shares some responsibility for her tragic death, stemming from her infidelity. At the memorial service, Jamie, the eldest son of she, spoke for himself and his younger brother, Leo. He expressed that when he thinks of his mother, he remembers the hard work and dedication she put into them. He said she wanted her children to be happy, and her happiness was their happiness. He stressed that they would always remember this. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Teed family. What was supposed to be a peaceful holiday turned into a terrible nightmare, leaving the survivors with scars that would never heal. When the Teed family set out for their remote house to celebrate Christmas, they had no idea that their trip would lead them into a tragedy few could have imagined. So, what happened to them? Join me as we explore the story of today's case. Rolf Tita was born in Germany. When he was just 11 years old, he and his mother moved to the United States. Shortly after their arrival, his mother remarried and chose to begin a new life following her first unsuccessful marriage. Rolf was a quiet boy who excelled in his studies. When he started college, he met Kay. They were both studying similar subjects and shared similar life views. Like Rolf, Kay was calm and sociable, and she dreamed of building her American dream and starting a family with someone who shared her values. Rolf quickly seemed like the perfect match for her. They had so much in common that after their first meeting, they became inseparable. At this point, Rolf was just over 20 years old. Both of them had serious intentions for their future, and their parents supported their relationship, which was progressing well. The two of them decided to move to a new home and began a journey across the country. They first lived in Nevada, then in Utah, but this was just the start. As they traveled to various locations, Rolf and Kay enjoyed their time together and eventually chose to get married. Shortly after, they started planning their next move, looking for a larger house and considering starting a family. In 1963, the young couple moved to the small town of Humble, Texas, which had a population of around 10,000. They were dedicated members of the Christian church, loved children, and aspired to have a large family. They quickly became part of the local community and earned the respect of those around them. Unfortunately, the Tied couple faced challenges that prevented them from having children for many years. However, they found a solution. They decided to adopt. After adopting their second child, Kay was surprised to find out that she was pregnant again, which they viewed as a miracle. The pregnancy was so subtle that she didn't even realize it. She later gave birth to a healthy daughter named Trish. The family enjoyed a fulfilling life and happy, having everything they needed to cherish their time together. Rolf excelled in trading and had dreamed of starting his own business since his student days. By the time their children were born, he was earning a good income, which allowed Kay to stay home and focus on raising the children. Thanks to his hard work and entrepreneurial spirit, Rolf opened a company in 1969 that quickly became part of the Houston retail market. With their financial stability, they eventually purchased a house in Utah, a small town with just over 500 residents in the 1990s. The mountainous area felt peaceful and secluded. They found a beautiful house perched high in the mountains, and it was considered very safe, much quieter than the nearby towns. The locals were well acquainted with one another, and their families seamlessly integrated into this community. The house was located about 4 kilometers from the nearest road. A beautiful river flowed nearby, with trees lining both banks. Despite the transportation challenges, especially in winter, their family made it a tradition to spend the entire Christmas holiday there every year. To reach the house, they would leave their car in a parking lot near the road and use snowmobiles to travel up into the mountains, as this was the quickest way to get there. By December 1990, their family's routine had not changed. They planned to return to their forest house for the Christmas holidays. On December 20th, Kay and her son, Sean, flew from Texas to Oakley, where her sister Claudia Tidwell Nelson picked her up. Claudia drove her so they could wait together for the others. Rolf, Line, and Trish were scheduled to arrive the following evening, December 21st. Typically, Rolf wrapped up his work before the vacation, while Kay visited her sister Claudia to help organize the gathering and prepare food and supplies for their trip to the mountains. At the usual spot where they parked their cars to switched modes of transportation, Kay and Claudia noticed a young man who looked suspicious. Even though it was freezing outside, he was wearing light shoes and a thin shirt, which was quite odd. They offered to assist him, but he didn't respond and instead walked faster, quickly disappearing from view. They reached their house just before sunset and had dinner. Claudia chose to stay overnight. In the morning, thinking she saw a figure outside the window. Claudia and Kay searched for any signs outside but found nothing. It appeared that someone had used their paths without being seen. Ultimately, they chose to focus on getting ready for the busy weekend ahead. On December 21st, by the time Rolf and his daughters arrived, everything is almost ready. Kay shared details about recent events, including a suspicious person she had encountered while with Claudia. She felt particularly uneasy about this stranger, who seemed to belong to the area. Kay suggested that Rolf take hunting rifles and transport them to the house on a snowmobile, just in case something unexpected occurred. However, Rolf declined, believing there was no need for such precautions. He felt confident that everything would be fine and thought that carrying weapons in everyday life was too dangerous. In fact, Rolf lacked experience with rifles and pistols. He mentioned that this area has been the safest in the last 100 years. In the suburbs, there has only been one incident, which was not even related to gunfire. Despite some aggressive driving and poor behavior on the roads, there have only been a few robberies over several decades. Unfortunately, he was unaware of how dangerous some people in the area had become. Kay expressed that something was off, so she decided to take precautions. She grabbed a couple of rifles and loaded them onto the snowmobile, saying it would make her feel safer. Her husband did not object. An adult among the teenagers helped move their belongings into the house. Claudia left in the morning to buy supplies she had forgotten for the upcoming holiday. Kay and Rolf decorated their home and prepared for a celebration. Because they lacked some necessities, they decided to go to the city to buy more. At this time, Sean, feeling overwhelmed by the busyness, asked to stay the night with his Aunt Claudia, which likely helped him relax. After dropping Sean off, their family visited Kay's mother, Beth. At that time, she was 72 years old, had poor eyesight, and was partially paralyzed due to a car accident earlier that year. Kay and her family visited her regularly and often took her to their home. This visit was no different. They spent the evening talking and enjoying each other's company, preparing to leave for the mountains the next day. On December 2nd, around noon, Teed family went to town. It was a particularly frosty day. The group then split up. Rolf and Trish planned to return to the cabin, while Kay, Linny, and Beth walked towards their house in the mountains. The two groups ended up about 2 hours apart. Kay and Linny arrived at their destination first and intended to set up a chair. While stopping near the garage, Linny noticed a dark figure in the main bedroom. Mistaking it for her cousin David, she didn't think much of it. Linny ran in, immediately turned on the hot water to warm her hands, and with her peripheral vision, she saw a dark figure hiding behind the refrigerator. Thinking it was just David, trying to scare her, she laughed to herself. However, when the figure stepped into the light, she realized it wasn't David at all. It was a young man with curly hair, he pointing a gun at her. She attempted to alert the others, but they had already noticed the armed intruder. Kay felt powerless against the intruder, regretted not grabbing a gun from the garage. He commanded Linny to help her grandmother and mother go upstairs. Beth, with her daughter and granddaughter, struggled to ascend to the second floor, worried that the intruder might start attacking if they didn't hurry. Another man wearing glasses appeared, also holding a weapon. Kay panicked, pleaded for their lives, promising to give anything. Without hesitation, the stranger man with curly hair attacked her by force. She fell to the ground, screaming in pain. The assailant attacked her several more times. Then, he aimed the gun at Beth and also attacked by force her in the face. Surprisingly, Beth did not die. She collapsed but quickly tried to get back up. The thug attacked her again multiple times. He confused about needing to use so many bullets, while another man seemed to enjoy the chaos. Linny prepared for her own fate, but unexpectedly, she was taken to the bedroom. The intruders gagged her with a dirty sock and tied her hands and feet. One of the two strangers brought a dog and handed over for Linny, claiming it would calm her down. They left her and returned to their shot victims. Gang leader continues to attack Kay and Beth, then took all the jewelry from the dead and emptied their pockets of valuables. They dragged the bodies outside, leaving them in front of Linny. She had just witnessed her grandmother and mother die. Simultaneously, she realized her father and younger sister would be home soon. She was in danger herself and wanted to warn them, but there was no time. At 2:45 p.m., Rolf and Trish rode snowmobiles back to the house. Sean still lives with Claudia. Meanwhile, the killers were waiting for new victims, and one of them held a weapon to Linny's head, threatening to kill her if she made a sound. When Rolf entered the house, he saw Linny being used as a human shield by an armed man who had a weapon pressed to her head. The strangers confronted Rolf and the rest in the living room. The newcomers immediately noticed the bodies of their loved ones and wanted to help, but the attackers prevented them from doing so. In a desperate attempt, Rolf began emptying his pockets, giving the criminals cash and his expensive watch. However, the leader ordered his partner to attack Rolf. The second attacker hesitated, clearly reluctant to get involved. Finally, the leader aimed his pistol and pulled the trigger, but it only clicked. He tried again, and still nothing happened. The third time, he succeeded in attacking Rolf. Trish panicked to see her father collapse to the floor, bleeding. The attackers then searched Trish's bag, but did nothing to her. Instead of escalating the violence, the criminals took Linny and Trish to a bedroom, then locked them inside. They found canisters of gasoline stored in the house for snowmobiles, and began pouring it everywhere. They chatted casually, unwrapped Teed family's gifts, and filmed their antics with a camera they found in the home. They even enjoyed a festive meal prepared by Kay. It seemed they had planned to destroy all evidence of their presence, and they acted nonchalantly. They then returned to Rolf. The leader attacked him in the back of the head again, and subsequently poured gasoline over his body as well. The criminals ordered Trish and Linny to load all the stolen items onto snowmobiles, which were in the garage. They didn't use gasoline to set the garage on fire, as they needed it for their escape. A guy loaded his gun, unbuttoned his jacket, and revealed a knife. Leanie noticed this, and he assured her. The criminals then set fire to the house and drove away with the two girls as hostages. While driving the snowmobiles, Trish and Leanie considered their options for escaping. They thought about crashing into a tree or causing an accident to get rid of their captors, but they couldn't come up with a plan. During this time, their uncle, Randy Zorn, was driving his car to the Tide family home. He encountered the snowmobile-carrying criminals and waved to them, thinking they were familiar faces, possibly his nieces with their boyfriends. However, he was taken aback when they didn't respond to his greeting. Normally, Leanie and Trish were respectful and would greet him back. The criminals didn't recognize Randy and simply drove past him. In the parking lot, the strangers transferred the girls into Tide family's car. It was the car Rolf brought the food to. They filled with fear that the experience of their death would be painful. With no other choice, they complied and took their seats in the back of the car. Randy also arrived in the parking lot and waved to them. However, Leanie and Trish ignored him because they feared he might become the next target of the killers. The leader of the group noticed Randy and asking Leanie if she knew him. She responded that she did not recognize the man. Right after that, the car carrying the hostages left the scene. A moment later, Randy saw a man coming. There was severe frost, but he was without a jacket, without shoes, and even without a hat. It seemed his face was literally torn apart, with drops of blood frozen on him and his face swollen. Randy recognized it was Rolf. Rolf told of the attack on his family. Remarkably, he survived and managed to escape to the parking lot in an effort. He said, the attackers broke into his house in the woods, doused it with gasoline, and set it on fire. The fire quickly spread, but Rolf pretended to be dead and waited until the chaos died down before taking action. He initially tried to put out the fire, but the fire spread quickly due to the gasoline, causing his jacket to catch fire. He ran into the bathroom, took it off and suffering only minor burns. Fortunately, the garage was not on fire. Driven by the desire to save his daughters, Rolf pursued the kidnappers for 4 kilometers, despite being injured and having impaired vision. He knew the route well enough to reach his destination, but he clearly needed urgent medical attention. Randy put him in the car and drove towards the city, but the medical center was too far away. Randy fears that there may not be enough time to save Rolf's life. He called emergency services, requesting the helicopter and reporting a fire. Meanwhile, the criminals with the hostages were heading towards the canyon. Suddenly, a patrol car passed by them. The police car quickly turned around and began to follow the criminals. The kidnappers ignored the officers' demands to stop and sped up to 150 km/h. With the bad weather and slippery roads, the situation was extremely dangerous. The criminals trying to escape from the police drove past a checkpoint. Several patrol cars joined the chase, and about half an hour later, the criminals got stuck on an embankment. They attempted to climb out to flee. Meanwhile, Leanie and Trish seized the opportunity to escape, ran towards the police. When the hostages are safe, a brief shootout ensued. Leanie pleaded with the police to handle the attackers who had killed her mother, father, and grandmother. The criminals surrendered immediately. Both were detained without sustaining injuries. Meanwhile, doctors arrived quickly by helicopter to take Rolf to the hospital. They fought to save his life. Despite being attacked in the face and then in the back of the head, Rolf miraculously survived the attack and remained conscious for most of it. He later recovered without experiencing severe consequences from his injuries. Right after that, firefighters fought the fire. The house did not burn down completely, but the property was seriously damaged. When the police arrived at the crime scene, they described it as the most terrible thing they had seen during their work. There was blood all around, with the bodies of the victims left inside the house, was a terrible smell of burnt corpses' flesh. Here they find cameras recording footage of the criminals holding the victims and laughing at them. Based on camera footage, the criminals were arrested, and they are only 25 years old. The killer himself, Von Taylor, had curly hair and was the instigator. Both guys had served time in the Utah State Prison before this crime. In there, Taylor for burglary and arson, while his partner, Edward Deli, had less serious charges. They met each other in a rehabilitation center where they were sent shortly before the end of their prison term. Here, they were prepared to start life from scratch without crime. However, instead, a cunning and bloody plan was born in the minds of the criminals. They escaped from the rehabilitation center instead of integrating into society. On December 14, the thugs hitchhiked to Oakley, where Taylor's father had his own house. There, they spent about a week planning the robbery. In fact, on the day of their arrival at Tidy's house, Kay saw a suspicious guy in the parking lot. Without outerwear, he was just examining the nearby houses in search of another target for robbery. Kay and Beth immediately attracted his attention. On December 22, the criminals broke into the house of the Tidy family when they left for the city. The attackers behaved like the owners, even having fun murders and thefts. They decided to use Trish and Linnae as human shields, planning to get to New York, then get rid of the hostages and disappear into the big city. On January 22, Taylor and Deli were officially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and 2 counts of aggravated kidnapping. In addition, there are other crimes including theft, arson, and resisting arrest, not to mention escaping from a correctional facility. Both immediately said they had mental problems. However, the examination did not reveal any mental abnormalities in them. They were simply stalling for time. 5 months later, Taylor pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder in exchange for all other charges being dropped. Taylor admitted at trial that he was the mastermind behind all of this. He attacked Beth and Kay and felt no remorse. The medical examiner found that Kay had 5 wounds, and Beth also was struck by 3 bullets. Rolf was attacked in the face and then doused with gasoline. When Rolf entered the courtroom, Taylor recognized him. Taylor's face was frozen in surprise, even cursed, and could not believe that Rolf had survived. Ultimately, Taylor was sentenced to death. Despite the confession of the mastermind, Edward Deli pleaded not guilty and decided to appear in court. 2 weeks after Taylor was convicted of murder, Deli's trial began. He had no idea that Rolf had survived, but he from the very beginning showed remorse and insisted that he was not involved in the deaths. He did not kill anyone. According to him, the original plan was to rob, and Deli did not expect that Taylor would start killing. He refused to shoot anyone. Naturally, the prosecution tried to portray Deli as exactly the same cruel person as Taylor. He insisted that he could not pull the trigger. This meant that Rolf, who had witnessed the events, could be the defendant's only chance to escape from a lethal injection. Deli's lawyer tried every way to present a favorable picture for him. Linnae also testified in court. She remembered how Deli brought a dog into her room, saying that it should calm her down. Also, he talked to her and Trish to reassure them. It was he who told them to get out of the car when the car stopped. When the court agency discussed finding Deli guilty of second-degree murder, it meant that he received a life sentence, but with the right to parole. The Tiade family filed a lawsuit against the state. They wanted compensation for the deaths of Kay and Beth. According to the survivors, it was the state leadership that was to blame for the escape that the prisoners made from the rehabilitation center, because this led to the bloody massacre. In fact, the claims were quite justified. It became known that on December 22, Von Taylor called his friend named Scott Manley. He told Scott that he and Deli had escaped from a rehabilitation center and also stolen a weapon. Scott admitted that by that time, Taylor and Deli had already robbed several houses in Oakley and now intended to deal with an entire family. Scott was afraid of their intentions and immediately contacted law enforcement officers, telling them about Taylor's confessions. Despite this, the police simply ignored the message. Unfortunately, the court rejected the Teed family's claims, and no one was punished for their negligence. In 2001, Line received a letter from Delhi in which he asked for forgiveness. He wrote that life in prison had changed him. Before, he was just a stupid young man who followed the example of a friend who showed him a cool lifestyle. Line read this letter over and over again, in tears and with hatred. Finally, 10 years later, she decided to throw off the burden and wrote a response to Delhi, in which she stated that she forgave him. After that, she felt much better. After the verdict was passed, Delhi did not try to appeal the court's decision. Most likely, he will never be released from prison, given the severity of the crime in which he took part. Meanwhile, Taylor has filed 4 appeals. He cited various reasons, including the bias of the jury. All these absurd appeals were rejected. However, these appeals helped him repeatedly push back his execution date. Sometime later, Rolf fully recovered from his injuries and renovated the house. He now enjoys spending time remembering his loved ones. Line and Trish got married and became mothers of many children. Long after that, Rolf died of cancer surrounded by loved ones in 2008. The horrific case of the Teed family not only left an indelible mark of loss, but also shook the community to recognize the fragility of personal safety, even in the most peaceful places. The story of Line and Trish Teed's resilience serves as a powerful reminder of the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Decades have passed since the case, but the lessons from this tragedy remain relevant, highlighting the importance of justice, compassion, and the ongoing efforts to protect communities from similar atrocities. Thank you for watching. If you liked my work, subscribe to the channel, support this video with a like, and let's discuss this story in the comments. Thank you all and goodbye. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Claudia Ornisi. On the morning of July 21, 2011, Stefan contacted the police in Cremona, Italy. Stefan, a resident of the city, had a daily routine of visiting his daughter, Claudia, and his 2-year-old granddaughter, Livia, for coffee. He would spend time with them, chatting, discussing news, playing with Livia, and then continuing with his day. However, on this particular morning, Stefan was deeply alarmed when he couldn't follow his usual routine. Stefan called Claudia several times before going to her house, but she did not answer, which made him very worried. Soon after, he went to her house on Via de Galli, rang the doorbell and knocked on the door, but still no one answered. Using a spare key that Claudia had entrusted to him for emergencies, he entered the house. As soon as he stepped inside, he noticed a strange, overwhelming smell that resembled a gas leak. Holding his breath, he began checking the rooms, fearing the worst. When he entered Claudia's bedroom, he discovered her lying motionless on the bed. He tried to wake her by shaking her, but she didn't respond. In a nearby crib was his niece, Livia, also motionless and cold, like Claudia. In a state of panic, Stefan rushed to the neighbors for help. An emergency rescue team of doctors and police arrived at 8:30 a.m., but both Claudia and Livia were dead. Stefan was devastated, especially by the sight of his little granddaughter motionless, wrapped in her blanket in the crib. From the beginning, investigators suspected that Claudia had taken her own life and that of her daughter. However, some inconsistencies have emerged. First, the strong smell of gas was concerning. An expert inspected the apartment and discovered 4 small propane gas cylinders, the kind typically used for camping stoves. One was positioned right next to Claudia's head at the bed, while the other 3 were placed in the corners of the room. It appeared as though she had intentionally filled the room with gas to end her life painlessly. The question, however, is whether 4 small cylinders could release enough gas to reach lethal concentrations in an uninsulated room to kill both Claudia and Livia. The apartment showed signs of ordinary disarray, consistent with a home shared with a young child. On the kitchen table, detectives found 10 nearly empty packages of Xanax, each originally containing 10 pills. Only 5 pills remained across all the packages. What caught their attention was how methodically the empty blister packs were arranged. They were stacked neatly in a row, almost as if placed that way intentionally to draw notice. This meticulous organization seemed unusual for someone in a state of despair and further heightened investigators' suspicions. Any theories needed verification. What investigators uncovered revealed a disturbing scenario. Initially, they considered the possibility that Claudia had attempted to end her life. If she had ingested 95 Xanax tablets, an overdose could have been the cause of death. However, toxicology tests showed that the drug levels in her blood were too low for such an amount. While small traces of the drug were present, they were far from enough to indicate she had taken 95 tablets. The results suggested she had been sedated and lost consciousness. What is suspicious is that Livia's blood test showed the same result as well. Judging from the bedroom scene, it appeared Claudia placed the gas cylinders, sealed their nozzles with duct tape, and began filling the room with gas. She left her daughter in the crib and then lay down next to her. This appeared to suggest a planned suicide murder, but inconsistencies in the story began to surface. For one, Claudia's relatives were firmly against the idea of voluntary suicide. The woman had no known reason to take her own life. She had never suffered from mental illness, harmful addictions, or depression. Moreover, Claudia adored her daughter so much that even if she had wanted to take her own life, she would never allow her beloved child to die. This confidence undermined the detective's suicide theory. Given the circumstances of the victim's life at the time of her death, Claudia Arn was a 40-year-old single mother. She grew up in a warm, loving family environment surrounded by her parents and sisters. She was described as a calm, kind, and pleasant woman, full of life. Motherhood had been a dream come true for her, a way to fully embrace and express her femininity. Claudia had always cherished the idea of having a family and children. Everyone who knew her described her as a devoted mother and role model. It was unimaginable for those close to her that she would harm her child under any circumstances. Though Claudia had experienced challenges in her personal life, they were not significant enough to suggest she would take such a drastic step. No matter how hard the detectives tried to find solid evidence proving this was a voluntary suicide, doubts kept arising. Claudia simply did not have a clear motive to take her life, let alone harm her child. The longer the police analyzed the crime scene, the more discrepancies they uncovered with the original suicide theory. For example, detectives could not find garbage bags in the apartment, where the cardboard packaging for the Xanax blister packs should logically have been discarded. This absence seemed peculiar. If Claudia had decided to commit suicide, taking out the trash would hardly have been a priority. This observation only deepened the mystery further. The detectives questioned whether someone preparing to take 95 pills would also think about taking the time to throw out the trash. Additionally, they noticed that the control levers on the electric meter were lowered and its lid was left open. This also seemed inappropriate for Claudia's situation. However, it was speculated that she might have been afraid an explosion could occur if gas had been filled. Suspicions were further fueled and the autopsy results came in. According to the forensic expert, Claudia and her daughter died from gas poisoning after losing consciousness from the drugs. However, fire experts denied this possibility, given the level of propane saturation in the room. 4 gas cylinders were clearly not enough to kill 2 people. This added weight to the version involving a third party. Investigators began to suspect that Claudia could not have voluntarily left this life. It was alleged that gas poisoning occurred when bags filled with gas were placed on the heads of Claudia and her daughter. Evidence of this came from the characteristic adhesive tape traces found during a thorough examination of the bodies. In this case, only 1 cylinder per person would have been needed, but it was deemed impossible for Claudia to do this by herself. The more the detectives analyzed the evidence, the more obvious it became that this was murder. The suicide theory was quickly abandoned. When detectives inspected the gas cylinders, suspicions only grew stronger, as no fingerprints were found on their surface. The idea that Claudia could have carefully wiped every canister clean before placing it on the floor seemed absurd. While the use of gloves could justify this, no such gloves were found anywhere. Although they might have been discarded, there was no evidence to support this. Additionally, there were no fingerprints on the Xanax blisters either. This raises further concern, as removing 95 pills would inevitably leave a trace. It became increasingly clear that detectives were looking for a killer, or potentially multiple killers, who were involved in this crime. Investigators shifted their attention to the gas cylinders and Xanax, focusing on tracing their origin using the serial numbers on the packaging. The process was complex and laborious, as it involved not only the city of Crema but also the entire Lombardia region. Through a thorough investigation, they traced it to the town of Cariati, which has a shopping mall. There, they found the gas canister and Xanax that matched the shipments found at the crime scene. Records showed that the pills were purchased there on July 16, 2011, just 4 days before the tragic incident. However, the buyer paid in cash and used a non-personalized discount card, making it difficult to identify them. Nonetheless, investigators persisted and uncovered that the individual had used the card on July 19 to buy food and beverages in a nearby city. Fortunately, a store clerk remembered the customer, a grumpy man, estimated to be 45 to 50 years old, of average height and elegantly dressed. He spoke eloquently but did not provide his name. The July 19 purchases raised further suspicion, as the man bought adhesive tape, potentially used to secure the buttons on the gas cylinders, causing them to release gas automatically. At this stage, the man's identity was still unknown. Authorities were working to determine who might have had a motive to harm Claudia and her daughter. The evidence suggested someone close to Claudia, as there were no signs of forced entry, indicating that she had willingly allowed the person into her home. This led investigators to focus on people she knew well. Ultimately, they concluded that the prime suspect was her ex-partner, Maurizio Iori, a well-known ophthalmologist in Crema and the biological father of her daughter, Livia. Maurizio was a man of good reputation, with a successful career and a respected family background. Claudia had a brief but intense relationship with him, which started in 2008 when she visited him as a patient. Mauricio's polite, kind, and professional demeanor immediately appealed to Claudia, who was lonely at the time. She quickly developed feelings for him. Being a prominent and accomplished man, he soon invited her on a date, and his refined manners and attentiveness captured her heart. However, their journey toward happiness faced a significant obstacle. Claudia was single and free, while Maurizio was married with 2 children. From the beginning, this bothered Claudia, but Maurizio reassured her that his marriage was troubled and he was planning to get divorced soon. As their relationship deepened, they began meeting in secret, often traveling to other cities to avoid raising suspicion from Mauricio's wife. He explained that secrecy was necessary because if the affair were discovered, it could complicate the divorce process and division of assets. Claudia gradually felt trapped in the role of a mistress and started to question her place in the relationship. Conflicts occasionally surfaced, but Maurizio always managed to calm her down, urging her to wait until the situation was resolved. Her hopes for a better outcome were shattered in May 2008, when Claudia discovered she was pregnant. For Maurizio, the news was unwelcome and infuriating, as he made it clear he did not want children outside of his marriage. This heightened the tension between them, leading to their separation. Claudia pinned her hopes on the child, believing motherhood would bring her happiness and purpose, but instead, the pregnancy further deepened her struggles. After their breakup, Claudia began to see Maurizio differently. She realized he was never truly committed to building a family with her but was only interested in having fun on the side. His politeness and kindness disappeared entirely. He pressured her to have an abortion, but she was shocked and devastated, so she refused and was determined to keep the pregnancy under all circumstances. For 3 months, Maurizio persisted in urging her to end the pregnancy, but Claudia held her ground. Eventually, He met with her again and made his intentions clear. His primary concern was protecting his reputation. He insisted that no one should ever find out about Claudia or their child. He demanded that she keep her distance and avoid contacting him. Claudia, however, refused to comply. Feeling deceived and betrayed, she was determined that her daughter would not grow up in secrecy or obscurity. Resolute in safeguarding her and her child's future, Claudia sought legal help to force Maurizio to recognize his paternity. As Claudia's pregnancy advanced, Maurizio finalized his divorce. To her dismay, she discovered he had started a relationship with another woman before breaking up with her. Even more shocking, this new girlfriend was also expecting a child. This confirmed Claudia's belief that Maurizio had been dishonest and deceitful toward her. In the meantime, he concentrated on safeguarding his own interests. He was preparing to marry his new partner, a wealthy woman who aligned with his social status. He feared that if information about his relationship with Claudia or the fact that he had a child out of wedlock were revealed, his career and reputation would be severely affected. He admitted this fear to Claudia frankly. On February 3, 2009, Claudia gave birth to her daughter, Livia. Over time, Maurizio softened slightly and agreed to provide limited support for Claudia and the baby, who lived with Claudia's parents. He pledged to pay $400 per month for Livia's expenses and purchased an apartment for them, covering its mortgage. However, he restricted himself to visiting his daughter only once a week. This arrangement strained their already tense relationship. Despite everything, Claudia remained hopeful, believing that Maurizio might eventually develop genuine love and affection for Livia, grow into his role as a caring father. The last scheduled meeting between Maurizio and Livia was set for July 20, 2011. Claudia's mother told the police that Claudia had been feeling unwell, and Maurizio planned to visit to support her. He suggested they have dinner featuring sushi, a surprisingly out-of-character choice for him. Claudia's mother immediately found his behavior strange. Maurizio disliked fish and had never stayed with them for more than an hour, let alone brought food or made thoughtful gestures. Additionally, he brought a package of sauce that police would later confirm he had purchased on July 19, 2011, a detail that would become critical in the subsequent investigation. Claudia's mother grew convinced that Maurizio was connected to what happened afterward. Her greatest distress came from Claudia's genuine belief that Maurizio was finally trying to put effort into their relationship. Claudia had been so optimistic about the dinner, even borrowing her mother's best items for the occasion. Tragically, those items were later found the next morning on the lifeless bodies of Claudia and her child. The police quickly launched an investigation and identified Maurizio as the main suspect, bringing him in for questioning. While denying any involvement, he voluntarily went to the station and stated that he had not been at Claudia's apartment that evening. He provided an alibi, claiming that on July 20th, he left his office at 6:30 p.m., got takeaway food, ate it at home, and then went to the cinema at 9 p.m. He said he paid for his movie ticket in cash and returned home to sleep after watching the film. Mauricio's alibi fell apart quickly. He claimed he didn't keep his cinema ticket, but police reviewed security footage and confirmed he wasn't among the 38 people leaving the session. His mobile phone data added to the inconsistencies, as it showed his phone had stayed near a beach house several kilometers away during the entire evening, contradicting his claim of being at the cinema. It became clear that Maurizio had lied about his whereabouts. When police questioned Mauricio's wife, she revealed that she had tried to contact him multiple times without success. Starting at 7:30 p.m. and continuing until 11 p.m., she repeatedly called him, but he never answered. She also tried reaching his office and friends, but no one knew where he was. Eventually, she contacted a neighbor near their beach house, who confirmed seeing Mauricio's car parked outside. Suspecting he was inside, the neighbor called him but received no response. Upon entering the unlocked house, it was empty, but Mauricio's phone had been left behind for the entire evening. As investigators searched the house, they discovered a note addressed to Maurizio, written by Claudia. The note revealed a shocking secret about Mauricio's illegitimate child. The neighbor, who noticed the note, alerted the police for further investigation. Later, Maurizio returned to the beach house around 2 a.m. and called both his wife and the police to assure them he was safe. However, his explanations only deepened suspicions. Police proceeded with the investigation, increasingly convinced that Mauricio's lies and attempts to hide the truth were unraveling. Based on the CCTV footage, he did not return to the beach house, which led investigators to believe that he was at Claudia's house during that time, confronting his daughter and his estranged lover. His alibi was shattered by his wife's nervousness, which further complicated matters. Maurizio, a well-known ophthalmologist, resorted to lying, raising even more suspicion. Evidence against him mounted rapidly. It was revealed that he had purchased multiple packages of Xanax at a shopping center in another city, paying in cash, likely to avoid detection. Store employees later identified him through receipts linking to online orders found on his computer, as well as from search history showing he had researched how to kill someone with propane or Xanax. He seemed particularly interested in the case of a Moroccan prisoner who died due to a propane gas tank. When questioned about these suspicious purchases, including gas cylinders, Maurizio claimed that Claudia had spoken about using them to heat baby food for Livia. However, the Supreme Court found this explanation unconvincing. Overwhelmed by the mounting evidence, he eventually confessed that he had not gone to the cinema that evening as he initially claimed. Instead, he admitted to visiting Claudia and stated that when he left, she and Livia were alive and well. He claimed to have no knowledge of what happened afterward. Maurizio justified his lies as an attempt to conceal his affair from his wife and mislead investigators. Nonetheless, his extramarital relationship, along with his deep resentment toward his daughter Livia, became widely known. During a police search of the house, officers discovered a dramatic letter detailing these incidents and emotions. Claudia described Maurizio as a ruthless and deceitful man who betrayed her. It was after the birth of her child that she felt the full weight of despair. Her frustration stemmed from Mauricio's cold and even cruel behavior toward the baby girl immediately after her birth. It seemed as though he viewed the child as inferior. At the same time, Claudia discovers that Maurizio has an illegitimate child and plans to marry the child's mother soon. The arrival of the baby left Claudia confused and hurt, unable to understand why Maurizio treated her and their child so poorly. It became apparent that he did not consider her his equal, had no intention of marrying her, and had no plans to remain a father to their child, Livia. Meanwhile, Mauricio's mother, Paola, played a dominant role in his life. It was clear that Maurizio was completely under her control. He feared her disapproval and, as an adult, would hide details about his personal life, relationships to avoid her judgment. Even though Paola was unaware of his affair and its consequences, he seemed convinced that Claudia would never gain his mother's acceptance under any circumstances. As a result, he kept Claudia a secret, but she began pressuring him nonetheless. His intentions and motivations were unclear, particularly since he consistently denied any wrongdoing. Most of the evidence in the case was circumstantial, and authorities were unable to locate the murder weapon. Investigators focused on finding a bag of trash from Claudia's apartment, believing it contained critical evidence such as gloves and pill packaging. Maurizio likely disposed of the bag. In her letter, Claudia hinted at being blackmailed, which may have cornered her. Meanwhile, Livia was mostly rejected by Maurizio and encountered hostility even before her birth. The tipping point for Mauricio's decision to kill Claudia and Livia appears to have been her demand that he take full responsibility for Livia, treat her as an equal member of his family, and stop belittling her. Maurizio saw this as a serious threat to his carefully constructed life, his reputation, financial stability, and, above all, his mother's approval. Financial issues played a significant role as well. Claudia did not work, leaving all her expenses to be covered by Maurizio. Evidence revealed that, 3 months before the murder, Maurizio had been researching ways to recover mortgage payments for the apartment he had bought for Claudia. This indicates that he meticulously planned the crime to minimize financial losses stemming from the affair. On the night of October 11, 2011, Claudia and Livia were waiting for Maurizio to visit, as planned. He arrived with sushi, soy sauce, and drinks, all of which had been laced with a sedative. Claudia dressed up and prepared her daughter for the evening, hoping to charm Maurizio and mend their relationship. However, he had come with the intention of committing a double murder. After dinner, Claudia and Livia lost consciousness from the sedatives. Maurizio carries them into the bedroom and stages the scene to make it look like Claudia has harmed her and her daughter. He placed gas-filled bags over their heads, sealing them with tape. Once they were dead, he cleaned the scene thoroughly to remove any evidence, disposed of incriminating items, and left. Around 3 a.m., he drove to his beach house. On October 14, 2011, Maurizio Iori was arrested and charged with the premeditated murders of Claudia and Livia. The trial shocked the public, as it was hard to believe that a respected doctor could kill his mistress and their child. Despite the defense's arguments and requests for a reduced sentence, the court found the crime to be carefully planned. In January 2013, Maurizio Iori was sentenced to life in prison. His lawyers appealed, but the Supreme Court upheld the sentence in 2015. He was also ordered to pay $600,000 in compensation to Claudia's family. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Maurizio maintained his innocence and continued to speak to journalists, describing the trial as unfair and claiming he had been framed by the authorities. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Mindy Berenyi. Mindy Berenyi grew up in a small farming town in Antwerp, Ohio, in a middle-class family. Her mother, Shirley, met her future husband, Andy, while she was still in school. At the time, Andy was 18 and had completed his auto mechanic training, while Shirley was 17 and still in high school. Their relationship progressed quickly, and they married just a few months after meeting. Shortly after their marriage, Shirley discovered that she was pregnant by another man she had dated before meeting Andy. She had not been unfaithful to Andy, it was simply the result of a previous relationship. Shirley hesitated for a long time, but eventually, Andy accepted both her and the baby as his family. The couple stayed together for 15 years and had 3 children during their marriage. 2 of the children were Andy's, while the eldest was from Shirley's previous relationship. However, after 15 years of marriage, they decided to divorce. Shirley, feeling she could no longer cope as a single mother, gave up custody of all 3 children. The children went to live with Andy, their father. Mindy always loved her father. However, disturbing changes began to disrupt her life. When Mindy was about 9 years old, her father called her into his bedroom and asked her to give him a massage. Years later, Mindy realized this was the beginning of the abuse. At the time, she did not fully understand what was happening and complied, even though she felt something was wrong. She later recalled that it did not feel like a normal massage. Eventually, Mindy refused to go to her father's bedroom. From that point on, Andy's treatment of her became much harsher. Andy began to manipulate his children emotionally, insulting them and even resorting to physical violence. This caused Mindy's brothers to leave the house. Andy eventually remarried, which seemed to improve the strained family relationships, but nothing truly changed. He continued to exert tight control over Mindy, especially as she grew older. Like any teenager, Mindy wanted to spend time with her friends, but her father would not allow it. His behavior became increasingly controlling and manipulative. When Mindy got a job at a nearby McDonald's, Andy kept a close eye on her. He tracked the mileage on his car when she drove, frequently searched her room, and even recorded and listened to Mindy's phone conversations. When Andy was away from home, he turned off his phone to prevent his daughter from communicating with anyone without his supervision. She wanted to stay in touch with her friends and live like a normal teenager, but this angered her father. He would eavesdrop on Mindy's conversations and immediately disconnect her phone from the network if he heard something he disliked. He demanded complete obedience from her, but Mindy refused to comply. When Mindy turned 16, Andy's behavior became increasingly dangerous. He would grab and strangle her when she resisted his control. He would throw her around and beat her while trying to avoid leaving any evidence. The situation worsened when Andy discovered she was pregnant, although the identity of the father was unknown. Mindy was devastated, unable to imagine raising a child in such a hostile environment. Her father's abusive behavior had become unbearable, and she feared for her life and well-being. That same day, Mindy stormed into Andy's upstairs bedroom and grabbed a shotgun hanging on the wall. She then ran into the bathroom, intending to take her own life. Andy was not home at the time, but by the time Mindy changed her mind and decided to put the shotgun away to avoid her father's detection, it was too late. When Andy walked in and saw his daughter holding the gun, he immediately flew into a rage. Mindy later said she was terrified and thought she was in serious trouble. Andy turned away to close the door, saying he would deal with her right away. Moments later, a gunshot rang out. At approximately 4:16 p.m. on September 27th, Joni, Andy's second wife, called the police. When police arrived at the scene, they found Andy lying on the floor. Mindy claimed that she had acted in self-defense. According to Mindy, she had endured years of abuse, along with constant psychological pressure and total control from her abusive father, Andy, who would punish her for even the smallest mistakes. In an attempt to defend herself, she accidentally shot and killed her father. Lawyers accepted her testimony and planned to fight for her acquittal. However, a significant challenge was that Mindy rarely spoke about her struggles or the abuse she endured. Her father, Andy, had restricted her interactions with others, only allowing her to communicate with others when he was supervised. As a result, she had no opportunity to confide in her friends or anyone else about her situation. Additionally, there were no bruises or injuries on her body. This lack of evidence created serious obstacles to convincing the jury that this was indeed a case of self-defense. Shirley, Mindy's mother, supported her daughter's testimony. Mindy had repeatedly complained about her father's abusive behavior, but Shirley had dismissed each time as isolated incidents. Mindy would then reassure her mother that everything was fine, leading her to believe that her daughter was exaggerating. Now, Mindy claimed that her father had threatened her, and Shirley admitted that Andy had behaved similarly throughout their marriage. While at the police station, Shirley revealed that she had also suffered abusive behavior from her husband, which was the main reason for their divorce. However, she did not expect that Andy would use the same tactics on their daughter. The situation became even more complicated when Mindy faced information isolation. She was unable to socialize comfortably with others and could only occasionally spend a few minutes on the phone without Andy's supervision. Despite everything, Shirley supported her daughter. Andy's second wife, Joni, who had been married to him for 8 years, defended him. She described Andy as a loving husband and devoted father, raising 2 sons and doing his best for his ungrateful daughter, Mindy. She saw him as a decent man who was unfairly labeled a tyrant to justify the murder. According to Joni, Andy spent much of his free time with his children, often taking them to the nearby river to fish and boat. This account was supported by all of Andy's neighbors. Joni described her husband as a hardworking man who devoted his life to his family. Andy's relatives were steadfast in their support of him, insisting that he was never cruel or manipulative. From the beginning, they described Mindy as an insecure and disobedient child whose negative traits worsened as she grew older. They portrayed her as a pathological liar and a rebellious individual who frequently tried to run away from home and even stole her father's car several times. Andy also suspects that she may be using illegal substances. Concerned about her behavior, he believes that strict rules need to be put in place to deal with the situation. Andy's relatives claim that this was not an act of self-defense, but rather a brutal and calculated murder by Mindy. They allege that she killed her father, a man who did everything in his power to keep his daughter out of trouble. Joni reported that Andy had blocked Mindy's phone. This was because Mindy had been calling her friends frequently, often planning to run away. He later discovered that Mindy had been skipping work, which led him to periodically check her car's mileage to ensure she did not lose her job at McDonald's. Andy also began searching her room after suspecting that she was smoking. Based on these actions, Andy's behavior appeared consistent with that of a controlling yet concerned parent. In the months leading up to the murder, Joni kept a diary documenting many of Mindy's disturbing behaviors. Mindy was described as a rule breaker. Joni's diary recorded every attempt Mindy made to run away, which had happened 3 times in the past 2 months. The diary also described how Mindy spent days lying in bed, drinking, and being dishonest. Because of this behavior, her loved ones found it impossible to trust her. According to Joni, Mindy's behavior was so out of control that Joni feared for her own safety. She overheard Mindy say things to her father that made her feel extremely insecure. This behavior continued for years. According to Joni, Andy only lost his temper once. On that occasion, he grabbed Mindy by the neck and pushed her against a wall. However, it was clear that he had no intention of harming her. Joni categorically denied that there was any abuse toward Mindy. She also stated that she never heard Andy insult his daughter, call her worthless, emotionally pressure her, or humiliate her, as Mindy had described. Joni was home when Andy died. She noticed that Mindy was acting strangely throughout the day but did not think much of it. Everything changed when Joni heard a loud bang. She immediately ran downstairs and saw Mindy pointing a gun at her. Joni quickly retrieved the gun, and no one was hurt. At first, she thought Mindy was just trying to get attention. However, when she went into the kitchen, Joni saw Andy lying on the floor near the entrance through the open door. She called out to him, but he did not respond. When she got closer, she realized he was dead. Mindy killed her father, whom she had hated for years, seemingly without any particular reason. Joni claimed that Andy had always tried to support and protect Mindy from the hardships of life. When the police arrived at the scene, they arrested Mindy and took her to the sheriff's office, where she tearfully confessed to the murder. At the police station, Joni stated that the act was intentional. She believed Mindy was manipulative and untrustworthy. The lawyers sought to damage Andy's reputation, as it was the only way to prove Mindy's innocence. From the beginning, Joni believed that Mindy was trying to deceive everyone to avoid responsibility for her terrible crime. However, the lawyers argued that Mindy had suffered years of emotional and physical abuse and only acted in self-defense when she felt her life and the life of her unborn child was in danger. Mindy, who had recently found out she was pregnant, was terrified, believing that her father would kill her if he found out. Mindy's strongest supporter remained her mother, Shirley. The prosecution presented a wealth of evidence, including a poem found in Mindy's notebook, which had been discovered in her nightstand. The poem described the murder and was accompanied by a small drawing of a bleeding heart being stabbed with a knife. According to the prosecution, this suggested that Mindy had carefully planned the crime. The prosecution argued that when Mindy took the weapon from her father's room, she did not intend to kill herself. Instead, They claimed that she had taken the weapon and ambushed her father. Forensic scientists determined that Andy had been shot in the back with a shotgun, refuting the claim that he had attacked first. He could not have attacked with his back turned. A neighbor testified on behalf of the prosecution, stating that he was about 40 yards from the house when Andy opened the door. The neighbor said everything was quiet, and he did not hear Andy swearing or making threats, contrary to Mindy's claim. According to the neighbor, Andy simply walked into the house, and 10 seconds later, gunshots rang out. The defense attorneys argued that Mindy had been overwhelmed and scared for her life, and that she had acted in self-defense as she prepared to become a mother at a young age. The defense presented a key witness, Mindy's mother, Shirley, who described Andy as a cruel and abusive manipulator who had mistreated her and her older sons. Shirley explained that Andy would force the family to sit at the kitchen table for hours, humiliating and insulting them while clearly enjoying their discomfort. She noted that throughout their marriage, Mindy had been spared from these attacks only because she was so young at the time. However, after Shirley left, Andy's anger turned toward his daughter. Things changed when Mindy turned 15 and called Shirley for the first time, saying she could no longer tolerate Andy's bullying behavior. During this time, Mindy's mental state became extremely concerning. She was admitted to a clinic, where she was diagnosed with depression and had attempted suicide. She stayed there for 9 days, was given medication, and was discharged after her condition was deemed stable. However, her father's pressure and abuse continued. According to Mindy, this caused her to develop paranoia. She felt trapped, like a prisoner in her own home, unable to escape her overbearing father. To cope with her fear and pain, she began drinking and smoking marijuana. This behavior eventually attracted the attention of social services. However, it was Andy who contacted them, hoping to address what he described as Mindy's disturbing behavior. Andy was surprised when Laura Alvarado, a child abuse investigator, sided with Mindy after speaking with her. Laura believed that Mindy was not being defiant or out of control. Instead, it appeared that the teenager was feeling anxious and threatened at home. Mindy had pleaded for help, even expressing a desire to move into a foster home to escape her father. She also revealed that her mother had refused to take her in, unwilling to intervene because of the custody agreement. To Laura, this seemed less like the behavior of a rebellious teenager and more like a child who felt trapped and hopeless. Laura had several conversations with Mindy, but during their last meeting, something seemed different and more troubling. Mindy appeared closed off and unwilling to open up. Laura suspected that Andy had threatened her, but further investigation revealed no solid evidence. The most anticipated part of the hearing was Mindy's testimony in her own defense. This was a high-risk strategy, as it could either persuade the jury to sympathize with her or push them in the opposite direction. The outcome depended entirely on whether the jury believed her. Initially, Mindy's attorney decided to take the gamble, arguing that only Mindy could prove who was telling the truth and who was lying. However, the odds were clearly against her. Ultimately, the defense counsel advised taking a safer route. Mindy agreed to a plea bargain, which resulted in a reduced sentence of 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Soon after, the situation changed. At age 20, Mindy had already served 4 years in prison and was now focused on seeking justice and regaining her freedom. During this time, the legal system had recognized mental distress as a valid defense, even in murder cases. This change provided a new perspective for Mindy's attorney. An appeal was filed and eventually accepted. However, the appeal came with significant risks. If the jury rejected Mindy's testimony, she could face life in prison, with a minimum of 33 years before she could apply for early release. Despite the high stakes, Mindy was determined to fight to clear her name. Both the prosecution and defense returned to present their cases, as they had during the first trial. Andy's wife, Joni, continued to grieve the loss of her husband and remained determined to prove that Mindy was responsible. At trial, Mindy recounted her traumatic experiences of enduring years of physical abuse at the hands of Andy. She described how he threatened her daily, constantly demeaning and humiliating her for seemingly trivial reasons. Desperate to avoid her father, she tried to limit contact, but living in the same house made that nearly impossible. Even brief encounters often escalated into conflicts and confrontations. The prosecutor's office repeated the arguments they had made during the first hearing. Mindy explained that she had chosen the bathroom to end her life, but she hesitated and was unable to go through with it. She discovered she was pregnant and felt a sense of responsibility for her unborn child. For an hour, she struggled with whether to live or die until she heard her father return home. At that moment, she realized she had lost the chance to return the gun to his room without being discovered. Mindy knew her father would be furious if he found out about her plan. Overcome with fear and emotional distress, she decided to protect herself and her child at all costs. Mindy also explained why she shot her father in the back. She said she had told him to check his answering machine, hoping to distract him while she quietly returned the gun to his room. But as she walked into the kitchen, she saw him begin to turn around and noticed the shotgun. Panicked and believing he was about to lunge at her, she pulled the trigger. The jury heard conflicting accounts. Andy's wife, Joni, and a nearby neighbor claimed there were no signs of a struggle or any screams for help, further suggesting that the killing was premeditated rather than an act of self-defense. At the hearing, an anonymous source revealed that a juror was biased. The juror had traveled from another state, motivated by Mindy's story. As a result, a new hearing was scheduled with a different jury. This time, the defense presented a new witness, Mindy's treating physician during her first hospitalization for depression and end-life thoughts. The physician confirmed that Mindy was severely depressed and exhibited clear signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. She would flinch at the sound of any noise or footsteps. The psychiatrist supported Mindy's testimony that she had been humiliated and tortured by her father. Under the circumstances, her actions in self-defense seemed understandable, especially as she feared for her life and the safety of her child. Both sides presented strong arguments. However, the prosecutor's office held back a critical move. They introduced their own psychiatrist, who strongly disagreed with the conclusions of Mindy's treating doctor. Mindy faced a significant setback when her brother disputed claims of domestic violence in the home, allegations often made by both her mother and Mindy. Ultimately, after 24 hours of deliberation, the jury found Mindy Bereniite guilty of murdering her father. She was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 23 years. Mindy's lawyers were shocked by the outcome, as they had not anticipated such a harsh sentence. The fate of Mindy's child remains unknown. In an earlier interview, Mindy admitted she knew her actions were wrong but insisted that desperation and fear drove her to kill her father, whom she described as a tyrant. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of April Holt. By the summer of 2023, April Holt, a mother of two and a positive thinking coach, had gained over 200,000 followers on TikTok. She building her online reputation on optimism and stories of overcoming adversity. She often encouraged her followers with the mantra, "Keep growing, keep manifesting, and you will succeed." Tragically, at the end of July, April was discovered unconscious in her bathroom and passed away a few days later. While the police classified it as either an accident or self-harm, April's mother, Jamie, held a different belief and began advocating for justice. In early July 2023, April celebrated her 29th birthday, reflecting on her accomplishments at such a young age. As an independent eyelash extension technician, she had left her previous job to start her own business and work for herself. On her birthday, she expressed gratitude, stating, "Happy 29th birthday to me. I am so grateful for the opportunity to live another year, for 10,585 days of life." Among her many achievements, April cherished her family the most, especially her children. She was a devoted and loving mother, sharing snippets of their family life on TikTok. Her videos emphasized positivity, spiritual growth. She inspired her followers by saying, "Sending good energy to everyone who sees this. I wish you a productive day. Be goal-oriented and grow." Occasionally, her videos were simply light-hearted and entertaining. Over the years, April shared personal experiences, including her time as a homeschooled child, which left her with painful memories of social isolation that she eventually overcame. She and her husband, Donovan Holt, who was 33 years old, openly discussed the highs and lows of their marriage. They started as friends, then became best friends, lovers, and ultimately husband and wife, welcoming their daughter and son. Their relationship faced several challenges, such as a period of separation, financial struggles, depression, and serious health issues. Despite these obstacles, April always focused on the positives, portraying their journey as one of resilience and triumph through love. On the morning of July 28, April called her mother to confirm plans for a trip to see a movie, but the plans changed, and she suggested they meet at church the following day. Later that day, however, her mother received a call from Donovan, who reported that his son had found April unconscious in the bathroom. She had a plastic bag tightly wrapped around her head. April's mother, Jamie, noticed that Donovan was behaving oddly. He seemed to lack the deep sorrow and confusion expected from someone who had just lost a spouse. He allowed April's mother to make all decisions regarding her treatment while doctors worked to save her life. Meanwhile, Donovan sat with his head in his hands, rocking back and forth. After 3 days of fighting for her life, April did not regain consciousness and was declared dead by doctors on July 31st. An autopsy report released in November identified suffocation as the cause of death. However, the Nashville police found no evidence of foul play and classified her death as an accident. They informed Jamie that the case was closed, but Jamie refused to accept this conclusion. She vowed to continue investigating to uncover the truth. 2 weeks before her death, April had filed for divorce. This was not the first crisis in their marriage. The couple had previously faced difficulties and lived apart for several years. Although they had separated, they had not finalized their divorce. They maintained a friendly and warm image on social media, which may have been partly genuine, or perhaps they were caught in an unhealthy cycle, as they decided to give their relationship another chance after a long break. In their videos, they often spoke about the importance of forgiveness, open communication, and mutual support. However, the struggles in their marriage were never shared on their TikTok pages. After many years together, April was determined to leave Donovan this time and told her mother that she would not return to him. Donovan seemed to grasp the situation, as Jamie later discovered that a week before April's death, he pawned his wedding ring. There had been a fight between April and Donovan, but the specifics of the argument were unclear. Later, April's son told his grandmother about that tragic day, July 29th. He recalled that April woke up as usual, had coffee, wrote in her journal, enjoyed the calm of the morning, played with him, kissed both him and his father, and then went into the bathroom. He heard the argument escalate and pressed his ear to the bathroom door, noticing their feet beneath it. He tried to make sense of their words but couldn't hear anything, so he ran back to his room. After a while, his father came to him, dressed him, fed him, and told him to come when they called for the ambulance. April was taken to the hospital, but she was no longer breathing. The doctors informed the family that there was no blood circulation in her brain and that her brain was not functioning. On July 31, 2023, April was declared dead, prompting Jamie to fight for justice and bring attention to the case from the Nashville police and prosecutor's office. She launched her own campaign, reaching out to local news stations and celebrities while actively sharing updates on social media. This journey was challenging since the case had already been closed, making it difficult to attract media coverage. Despite major news outlets halting their reporting, Jamie persevered with her online campaign. Jamie obtained full access to the case and initiated her own investigation by filing a formal complaint with the Nashville Community Oversight Board. As a result, April's case was reviewed, and 4 months later, the Nashville police conducted a second investigation. Although this re-investigation did not alter the case classification or the official cause of April's death, it provided Jamie with valuable details to analyze. She meticulously studied the report day and night, searching for any clues. During this time, Jamie also focused on creating a stable and supportive environment for her grandchildren. Jamie openly discussed her pain and authored a book about her healing journey. Jamie became a strong advocate against domestic violence, highlighting how aggression can manifest in unexpected ways. After his wife's death, Donovan Holt moved to Texas and wanted his son to live with him. However, his son pleaded with his grandmother to allow him to stay, promising to do everything he could to remain by his grandmother's side. Jamie stressed that she does not influence her children's feelings and always aims to give them the freedom to choose where they want to be happy. She also wanted her grandchildren to stay together. Unfortunately, Jamie's relationship with her ex-son-in-law quickly deteriorated. In April 2024, she stopped posting about the case, explaining that she had been placed under a gag order. Despite this pause in her online advocacy, Jamie continued to seek justice for her daughter. Investigators initially stated that April had no visible injuries suggesting violence. However, Jamie observed significant bruises and marks on April's body while in the hospital, indicating otherwise. The autopsy report revealed marks on her neck, thighs, and ankles, along with a deep cut on the inner side of her thigh. Crucially, there was only one set of fingerprints found on the bag that was placed over April's head and on the tape that secured it. These fingerprints did not belong to April, they were identified as belonging to Donovan Holt. In September, Jamie confronted Donovan with the findings from her investigation. He admitted to committing the crime. Jamie wasn't shocked, she had known the truth. Following his confession, she took a recording of their conversation to the police, which led to the reopening of April's case. The previous conclusion was re-evaluated, and April's death was officially reclassified. On September 19, 2024, the police announced that Donovan Holt was arrested in San Antonio after confessing to a detective that he killed April Holt. A grand jury charged him with manslaughter, tampering with evidence, and perjury. He was moved from Texas to Nashville, where he was held on a $75,000 bond awaiting a hearing set for October 23. After discussions with the cold case investigation team in Nashville, all uncertainties regarding the case were clarified. Donovan Holt, 33, repeated to the police the same story he had told Jamie. During an argument, he choked April out of anger. To hide what he had done, he moved her to the shower, put a bag over her head, and secured it with tape. Then he went to make lunch for his son. It was only after his son finished eating that he asked their son to check on April and call for an ambulance. April's children are currently living with their grandmother, who reports that they are managing as best as they can, experiencing both difficult days and some slightly better ones. Jamie has expressed her gratitude to her social media followers for their support during this challenging time. Her struggle is far from over, as she is now working to upgrade the charges against Donovan from manslaughter to first-degree murder. With Donovan Holt awaiting trial, Jamie remains committed to seeking justice for her daughter. She insists that this case receives the attention it deserves until all facts and evidence are thoroughly examined, the crime against her daughter is fully understood. Her strength and relentless determination inspire those around her. Each day, more people are rallying to support Jamie, her grandchildren, including friends, acquaintances, and even strangers. On social media, in the news, and at public events, there is a growing conversation about the importance of speaking out and protecting loved ones. Jamie frequently shares her thoughts with her followers, emphasizing that her fight is not just for her daughter but for everyone who has suffered from cruelty and injustice. She hopes her story will resonate with other families who have experienced loss, highlight the importance of perseverance. April, Jamie believes, lives on in the hearts of her children and everyone she inspired with her positivity. Now, Jamie embodies this fight and shines as a light that cannot be dimmed. The day will come when Jamie, knowing that justice has prevailed. With deep sorrow for her child, Jamie will say, "You are not only my beloved daughter, you are a symbol of strength, resilience, and love. Your memory will continue to inspire others."